stream to fire up across the internet. And if you're not familiar with the program, we do multi-stream. And let's see what's going on here. A little bit slow. Things are moving a little slowly over here. We've got YouTube firing up. We're waiting on Periscope. We're waiting on Twitch. But it looks like we're live. So let's get moving. Hello, my friends. And one more time. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have represented thousands of good people facing criminal charges. And throughout our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with our justice system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We have prosecutors behaving poorly. We have judges not particularly interested in a little thing called justice. And it all starts with the politicians, the people at the top, the ones who write the rules and pass the laws that they expect you and I to follow, but sometimes have a little bit of difficulty doing so themselves. And so that's why we started this show called Watching the Watchers, so that together, with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency back down upon our system with the hope of encouraging some meaningful change. And we're grateful that you are here and with us on this lovely Thursday. We've got a little bit of stuff to get into. So first and foremost, I want to start off with a little bit of a discussion on dementia and Alzheimer's. There was a couple of stories that I saw come across my queue over the last few days that have this weird juxtaposition between them. Number one is Joe Biden is being called upon to implement Operation Warp Speed to address dementia and Alzheimer's. And then shortly thereafter, I also get a letter from the Democrats saying, Joe, we need to take the nuclear codes back from you. So very interesting there. We're going to get into that. We're going to go into the Alzheimer thing because sort of as a connection to the underlying issue is there's a lot of issues with Alzheimer's that I didn't know about. And I thought it was actually kind of provocative having a conversation with Miss Faith about it this afternoon. So we want to go through some of that. Then we're going to change gears. We're going to talk yet again about Ghislaine Maxwell because there is a new motion from her defense team saying that she really deserves to get out of custody this time. This is the third time that they're trying to get her out of custody. And it's a little bit unusual to see this much activity or this many repeat attempts. And I want to break that down because there's some interesting little nuggets that we can pull out of that. They are making more concessions. They're trying to negotiate. And there's some interesting things on that case. So we're going to get there. And then lastly, I want to spend some time talking about a situation where a prison here in Arizona was fined $1.4 million because they can't provide people with health care in their facilities. Big issue. And I think this is even more pertinent today because we're still dealing with COVID. We've got a New York variant that's poking around now. I think there's a California variant that we just heard about. And I've said for a long time that when you go to prison, your punishment is being removed from society. It doesn't mean that you're treated like an animal or a bag of dirt. And that is what's happening here in this country, not only in Arizona, but elsewhere throughout the nation. So I want to spend some time showing you just how bad it is and just how convoluted this whole system is. Everybody's pointing fingers at everybody else. And so we've got a lot to get into. If you want to be a part of the show, there will be periods of time in between the segments where we're taking questions. And so those questions currently, until we get some permissions back from YouTube, we're taking those over on our platform called locals.com. The web address is locals.com/watching the watchers. So there's a live show over there. I know that YouTube was having some issues this afternoon because some of the channel pages were just not loading. I saw on Twitter that Team YouTube was saying that you may not be able to access channels right now. So I'm not sure if you're experiencing that or not, but the point is, if you want to ask questions, that's happening over on locals.com/watching the watchers. You can also get a copy of the slides that we're about to go through there on that platform. Meet new people, make some connections, post some links, download a free copy of my book, amongst other things. And it's just the place to be when you think about it. So I'd invite you to go over there, watchingthewatchers.locals.com or locals.com/watching the watchers. And another little bit of a show note. So since we're talking about YouTube, since they're having some hiccups this afternoon, I wanted to also draw your attention to the fact that you may see some changes on our channel. And I just wanted to be open and transparent about that. We talk a lot about transparency on this channel, and I just want to tell you a little bit about what's going on. So as you know, early in February, we did get demonetized, and that means we lose a lot of features that I think make this program great. In particular, I'm talking about the super chat. So we're still taking questions from people over on Locals, and we're very appreciative of you. Thank you all for your support over there. But it's a little bit of a different show. It's a little bit of a different format because the people who don't like me, the people who have a lot of opposing opinions, they are typically not very inclined to go and join the Locals platform, right? They kind of don't want to support the show because they really just don't agree with me. And we still want to bring those people into the conversation. And so I've noticed that since we lost the super chats, it's sort of, I don't want to say an echo chamber here, but we're all in sort of alignment with a lot of our political philosophies. And I think that what makes the show interesting is every now and then we get somebody who will sort of, push me back and kind of knock me on my heels a little bit and help me think about something in a different manner. And so we are going to be making some changes to the channel so that we can reapply for monetization. I think it's sort of an integral part of the conversation. The reason we do the live stream is so that it's live and we can interact, and that the people on YouTube can ask questions, whether they want to support the show or not. They can just give a little, $1 super chat, $5 super chat without making a longer term commitment or without making a symbolic move by joining us over on Locals. And so you are going to see some changes. You may have noticed that the channel banner looks a little bit different. We have reached out to somebody who is a huge YouTuber, very, very impressive guy. I've been doing this for a long, long time, and he's going to help us understand where we went afoul of the YouTube policies. And we may have to, unfortunately, delete some videos from this channel. And it hurts me to say that. It hurts me to have to do that. But I think it's for the greater good. And so you may see some videos that disappear from this channel. Now, that being said, it's not because I'm ashamed of the content or I'm bowing down to the censorship overlords. We have that content. We're just going to upload it on a different platform. So if you are not already joining us on Rumble, please head over there, because that's where we're sort of, if anything has to come down off of YouTube, at least the important stuff, we're not going to modify, bring everything over if nobody was watching it. But the stuff that people are interested in, we are going to move over to Rumble so that it still lives there. And I'm talking about some of the more provocative content that we've covered. In particular, we have a lot of body camera coverage that we've talked about on this channel that I think YouTube is now unhappy with. Prior to January, they were okay with that, and they allowed us to be monetized. But in January 2021, the CEO of YouTube, Susan, came out and said that they're going to start sort of minimizing they call it borderline content, and they're going to elevate what they call authoritative sources. And so YouTube is changing dramatically right in front of our eyes, which is a bummer. YouTube used to be the place where you would come and you would get a differing opinion. If you wanted information from the authoritative sources, well, you would just go to CNN. You would just go turn on the channel. You'd go pick up the New York Times, your local newspaper that has stories from the AP. You would go over to MSNBC or Fox News, and you would get your fill of the standard media narrative drivel that they sputter out all day, 24/7, every single day of the year. So if you wanted that, you would go there. If you wanted some interesting thoughts, you'd come over on YouTube. But YouTube is now saying, well, if it's borderline content, I mean, this is in Susan's CEO. She's the CEO. You can see it in her open letter on the YouTube blog, January 21st, I think it was. They're going to push that content down. They're going to elevate the authoritative sources. And so I've said for a long time on this channel that we're going to play by YouTube rules. We're going to do what's in the best interest of you, what's in the best interest of the show, so that we have some longevity. And I'm not going to die on a hill that ultimately results in the termination of the show or the cancellation of this channel, because the way that I look at it, the way I interpret sort of this ecosystem that we're all trying to navigate right now, post-Trump, post-Capitol Hill, new 2021 environment, new administration, a lot of talk about dangerous language, a lot of talk about triggering people and stuff that is harmful. I still don't know what we did that was so harmful or dangerous, but we've got somebody who's going to help us try to figure that out. But the point is, we have to navigate it in a way that enables us to continue on our conversation for the long term. We're thinking long term, years down the road. And so if we have to make some minor adjustments now to bring back the super chats and get a little bit more engagement and sort of get the show back to where it was pre-demonetization, then that's what I want to do. That content is going to live elsewhere as we continue to figure this out. And so the analogy that I've used, I may have shared it with you before previously, is, YouTube is like meeting somebody at a cocktail party. It's just, hey, what do you do? Tell me about your business. What are you interested in? Okay, well, you sound like an interesting person. Why don't we get lunch? So you exchange business cards, you talk for 5-10 minutes, and then you move on to the next event, right? You move on to the next person. I didn't like that person. I'm not going to exchange cards with them. This person, though, sounds good. The next day you follow up. That's when you set your second date, if it's a little love interest there, or you go out for lunch and you develop a longer term relationship. And so that's sort of how I'm viewing YouTube. We're having introductory conversations, we're having lively discussions, and then sort of offline, we can have other conversations where free speech is more appreciated. And so that's where we're going with it. And I just wanted to bring it to your attention. I didn't want you to wake up and say, oh gosh, he deleted all those videos and he deleted all this, all this stuff on this channel, and he's bowing to the YouTube overlords. I know it kind of feels like that. We're sort of making some adjustments to comply with the rules, and we want to keep this show on the tracks. And so we're gonna make those changes. And I just wanted to let you know, if you have any feedback, please let me know. I'm sure some of you will. But for the foreseeable future, at least for the next about week or so, until we can reapply, you just may see some of those changes. So that's what I wanted to share with you. That's the show notes. And now let's get into the real news of the day. So the first story, the reason why I wanted to talk about this story is because two news articles just kind of crossed my desk in different days, and they sort of resonated. They rang my bell simultaneously. And so have you ever seen this happen where you're scrolling on Facebook or you're on Reddit or Twitter or any one of these social media platforms, and somebody will sort of ask a question in one post, and then the next post has the answer. So somebody will say, well, I wake up with a sore throat every morning. That's one post. And the next post says, here's 5 tips to improve your nighttime regimen so you stop breathing through your mouth. And you go, oh, well, maybe my sore throat is connected to my mouth. And if I improve my breathing when I go to sleep, then it sort of answers the own question. It's sort of like Scott Adams calls it the simulation winking at you. We're all living in a simulation, and sometimes the coders, the people who are operating the simulation, they'll just kind of give you a little bit of nudge, and you'll go, whoa, that was weird. What a weird coincidence. And so that happened to me. I was looking at Time, or I got an article, I saw a tweet on Twitter about Time. Time magazine said that we need an Operation Warp Speed for Alzheimer's and dementia. And I just thought, well, that is kind of hysterical. I mean, if you notice, they put Joe Biden's picture right here. And there's a lot of murmuring out there that Joe Biden may be sort of in that wheelhouse, right? Or close. And I know that you're not supposed to talk about that. I know that's probably going to be the next thing that we get in trouble for here on YouTube. I just knocked my camera around. Ugh, there it goes. So, it's a little bit of that territory where you don't want to presuppose that he has a medical condition. You don't want to make those claims. I'm not trying to do that here, but it has been sort of a running joke, especially amongst many people on the right, that he's not all there. And you even see this in the media. They say, oh, well, Joe has a stutter. Hello, he's had a stutter for 30 years, since he was a kid, actually longer than that. So cut him some slack. Or the alternative is, well, he's 70 something years old. Okay, he's old. He's lost a step. Cut him some slack. And so I can understand that position. I've expressed several times on this show that he's sometimes has lost more than a step. It's a little bit more serious than that. So I have some serious confirmation bias going on when I see a headline like this that says, hey, we need Operation Warp Speed, which means we got to move quickly, very quickly on this thing. And we're talking about Alzheimer and dementia. And then there's a picture of Joe Biden there. And I'm thinking, yeah, we do. We do need to move quickly. It has to go fast, because we have a president who is in that wheelhouse. And, again, it's confirmation bias. I know it. I just thought it was hilarious, and I wanted to share it with you. This article, it says here, no president has entered the White House with as clear a focus on Alzheimer's disease as Joe Biden. And you're just going, yeah, we've been telling you that for like 7 months now, ever since the primaries, longer than that. It's been, yeah, we know. Nobody's ever been focused on it as much as this administration. The commitment and attention on Alzheimer's at the highest levels of our elected leadership is long overdue. And so what I wanted to do is I saw that headline, and then I saw this one shortly thereafter, that now that we need Operation Warp Speed to help, in my hilarious hypothetical that I laugh about, but nobody else does, we're talking about Joe Biden potentially needing Operation Warp Speed. And then simultaneously, we get this letter from the Democrats saying, We respectfully request that you consider modifying the decision-making process that the U.S. uses in command and control of its nuclear forces. Same letter going to Joe Biden. So we've got time writing to Joe Biden, and then very short, this actually letter happened before that. Simultaneously, they're also saying, we got to take these nuclear codes away from you, Joe, until Operation Warp Speed is completed. They didn't say that, but that's how you sort of imply when you see these two things together. So we are going to go through this letter, but before we do, when we were reading through the Time article, there's actually some pretty interesting information in there. And Faith came into my office and she's all, wants to talk about it because it's important. And I'm not trying to make fun or poke fun at anybody with Alzheimer's. I know it's a serious thing, awful thing, very sad thing, anything with dementia. And so we have to talk about it with that amount of reverence. But it was just one of those it's an internet cultural thing that happens where you see two stories that just kind of make sense. They're separate stories, but when you combine them, they just have a very comical component to them. So that was my experience. But now let's dive into the actual article from Time, because there's some good stuff in here. President Biden, this article says, understands the scope of this slow-moving pandemic, the opportunity and the consequences of failing to seize the moment. Quote, if we do not find an answer to Alzheimer's, then in the next 19 years, every single solitary bed that exists in the United States of America will now be occupied by an Alzheimer's patient, he said at a campaign stop in Florida last fall. The fact that Alzheimer's is already our country's most expensive disease and continuing to manage it is more costly than developing a cure. And so I think it's a good point. And we see a lot of this type of language from politicians all the time. It's almost always wrong. I'm not sure that I've ever heard a situation where some sort of statement like that is definitive. I mean, remember when An Inconvenient Truth came out from Al Gore? He said, we got like 10 years. And then the coasts are going to rise. People in California are going to be, floating around on boats, paddling between cities. And none of that ever happened. Rush Limbaugh, rest in peace. He had a timer on his website for a long time, said, okay, we got 10 years left. And he started the timer back when Al Gore released the movie, and 10 years came and went, nothing. We're still here. Everything's fine. So it's the same type of story. I know why they do this. They're making a point, but it presumes that nothing changes. It presumes that we're not going to have any more Alzheimer's beds, or that we're not going to have a cure in the next 19 years, or that we're not going to understand more about the disease. So yes, if everything stayed the same, everything stayed the status quo, maybe Joe Biden was right. Maybe we will not have enough beds for everybody, but nothing's going to stay the same because it's 19 years. A lot of things are going to change. Things are changing rapidly every day, but it's a political statement. So I wanted to dive in a little bit on it just because we're talking about it. And what is Joe Biden doing? Because they're asking for a lot of money. We are now counting on President Biden's leadership. So let me back up and just show you who wrote this article. So it was by Maria Shriver and George Vandenberg. So they sent this, they posted this yesterday. She's the founder of the Women Alzheimer's Movement, and Vandenberg is the co-founder of Us Against Alzheimer's. So, good people doing good things. I don't endorse Alzheimer's. I want to support this. And the real question, though, is how do we do it? What are the proper mechanisms that can be put in place to help people reduce their risk factors? And so let's dive into that. We are now counting on President Biden's leadership. Within his first few months, Biden can and should lean on the power that comes with the office and follow through on his promise of $300 billion to promote research and development, including $50 billion for the NIH, I think that's the National Institute of Health, to find cures for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cancer, diabetes. We know that presidential action, coupled with bipartisan support, can lead to historic and seismic change. We need to educate every generation about the risk factors for dementia, an effort that could prevent or delay 40% of dementia cases, which is just a massive number. I mean, huge. That's almost half of them, just if you just manage the risks. And so I didn't know what the risks were, but Ms. Faith went and clipped those. And so we're going to go through them. But before we do, I just want to talk about sort of the scope of this. I mean, this is a big bill. $300 billion is nothing to scoff at. Remember that last I think, COVID bill that we had, that the Republicans had when Trump was still in office, was about $900 billion. For the entire country. And you think about how big COVID has been and all of the displacement that's been happening and the amount of resources that's necessary to sort of compensate for that. They pegged that at $900 billion. So this is a third of that. That's a massive number in my estimation. I mean, the COVID was decimating across not only the United States, but across the world. And so here they're saying, well, we need to do something kind of on an order of magnitude, like in that scale, about a third of it. $300 billion. It's a big, big number. And the article goes on. It says action is essential. Longer lifespans promise a rolling wave of Alzheimer's cases that will threaten to bankrupt the healthcare systems in even the wealthiest countries. And so we're going to talk about later in the show in another segment. We'll talk about some of the healthcare issues that we see in prisons. But we're also seeing here that maybe if we can deal with some of these risk factors, maybe if we can focus our health and wellness on preventative measures versus reactionary measures, waiting till everybody gets sick before we think about doing something, then maybe that will be a good way to improve the overall health and wellness of this entire nation. So as I mentioned, it said 40% of cases can be dealt with if you just deal with your risk factors. And here they are. New evidence, according to the Lancet, says 40% of dementia cases could be prevented or delayed by targeting 12 risk factors throughout the life. 12 factors increase the risk of dementia, but measures can be taken to reduce the risk. And so, we have scientists now in charge. Apparently, Donald Trump didn't have any scientists in his administration because now we're being told to believe the science. And so, okay, what is the science and how is our national policy now responding to these risk factors? And so, Joe Biden has promised $300 billion. He's also said that this is a pending crisis that if we do not deal with 19 years later, we're totally screwed. So let's take a look at how we as Americans can do our part to reduce our risk of dementia. Number one, to reduce the risk, the author calls for 9 ambitious recommendations to be undertaken by policymakers and individuals. Number one, low blood pressure. So reduce your blood pressure, 130 mm's Hgs or less in midlife around age 40 and up. So keep that blood pressure low. That means good, healthy diet. Encourage the use of hearing aids for hearing loss and reduce the amount of hearing loss by protecting your ears from high noise levels. So no concerts. That's good news because those aren't happening now or anytime in the foreseeable future. But keep the noise around you minimal. I had a lot of loud noise when I was in construction, so I'm a negative on that one. Reduce exposure to air pollution and secondhand tobacco smoke. Good advice, generally speaking. Prevent head injury, particularly targeting high-risk occupations. I got some of those going myself, but these are the big ones that Miss Faith underlined here and helped us out. These are the big factors. Number one, prevent alcohol misuse. Limit drinking to less than 21 units per week. So that's about 3 drinks every day, and that would get you to 21 units. So if you're somebody who's drinking that amount, then that will increase your risk for dementia or Alzheimer's. And people are drinking a lot more now, significantly more. We can see that in the data. I think middle of last year, there was a new report that alcohol sales had spiked across this country by about 60%. And that is not surprising to me because many parts of this country are still on lockdown and people are losing their ability to have interactions with other people. And so they are consuming more alcohol. The sales data, I think, alone shows that. Not to mention suicides are up. Substance abuse counselors are up. I did a Clubhouse conversation yesterday with a friend of mine in Arizona who runs sober living houses. He says they are busy. Everybody is bursting at the seams because everybody is coming under the pressure. They're drinking too much and they're using too many drugs. And so this is something that is directly related to the national policy. If we're going to keep kids out of school, if we're going to keep things locked down, if we have to have social distancing until 2022 or whenever it is that they're prospecting it to be, then that is going to contribute to more of this stuff. And so in my mind, the theme of this entire segment is the government is causing a problem that they're asking us to pay for so that they can fix the problem. It's sort of this spiral and around we go. And here, not only on this factor, but on the others, you're going to see how the government is basically getting in the way. It's making the situation worse by forcing people to live a certain way. We're going to have repercussions from this down the line. I've made this point long before. I don't know what's going to happen to school kids 6, 7 years old, who are basically missing, now going on a full year of school and in-person education. And the list just goes on and on, not to mention the long-lasting, long-term effects of lockdowns on the mental psyche of people, just as they're existing into the future. We've talked about it previously where, there are individuals who are still sort of living with, still alive today, who are living their lifestyle based on what they experienced or what their parents experienced during the Great Depression. People would save everything, right? If you have half a donut, you put it in a wrap and you put it in the freezer because you don't know if you're going to eat again, even though now we have an abundance of food. Most people do, right? Not everybody. But the point here is that a lot of those old fears will carry themselves over into the future. And we got to be asking ourselves these questions as it relates to the coronavirus and as it relates to our justice system and every policy, because they're all impacted by corona. They're all impacted by COVID. And the list goes on. So whatever number we're on, stop smoking, stop the uptake, support individuals to stop smoking. Again, generally good advice. But then we get down to other long-term ramifications. Provide all children with primary and secondary education. We're kind of half doing that now. Okay, some places in this country are mostly open, but most places are mostly closed. Most places are still doing sort of half in-person, half Zoom. At least here in Arizona, we have sort of optional. So a lot of parents are still keeping their kids out of school. Some are sending them back. But in other parts of the country, it's still nothing, right? Nothing at all. And this is, according to this study, according to the Lancet, a key factor in preventing people from having dementia. Similarly, we're also talking about leading an active life into midlife and possibly later life, and as well as reducing obesity and diabetes, none of which the lockdown helps. Lockdown is less gym, less social interactions. People are eating more poorly, a lot of DoorDash, a lot of, the whole thing is just, it's problematic. And so they're asking for more funds to go study some solutions to help rectify a problem that, in my humble opinion, the government is helping to foster and create. Let's go back to the original Time article. We took a pause. Let's go back. It says here, research suggests that a host of factors beyond genetics may play a role in the development and course of Alzheimer's disease. This is a great deal of interest, for example, in the relationship between cognitive decline and vascular conditions such as heart disease, stroke, high blood pressure, diabetes. Ongoing research will allow us to reduce the risk of Alzheimer's. A nutritious diet, physical activity, social engagement, see that right there? Social engagement, sleep, mentally stimulating pursuits have all been associated with helping people stay healthy as they age. These factors might also help reduce the risk of cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease. Clinical trials are testing some of these possibilities. So massive, it's important. Social engagement is more than just people not, you can't get together for your kid's birthday. Boo-hoo, woe is you. Life is so hard. Think of the greater good. Think of America. So you're saying you want to risk America so that you can go out to a dinner with your friends? How dare you? What a piece of garbage you are. And that's just, that's everywhere these days. You get those scowls and those looks when you're trying to engage in what I would call normal human living, but it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem. And this is just the first article of many that I'm going to be suspecting come out that show that this is not without consequence. Clinical trials are testing some of these possibilities, and it continues. Early life factors may also play a role. For example, studies have also linked higher levels of education with decreased risk of dementia. There are also differences in dementia risk among racial groups, sexes, all of which have been studied to better understand the cause and to develop the effective treatments and preventions for all people. So we're going to see what the government wants to do, how long we can continue to go on with this thing. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of 2 weeks to slow the spread. Isn't that nice? On March 13th, it'll be the national lockdown anniversary, 1-year anniversary. So we've had 1 year of 2 weeks to slow the spread, and I'm looking forward to celebrating that one. All right, so now that we have a foundation on Alzheimer's disease, now we know a little bit more about that. I wanted to go back and make my original point that it is hilarious. I don't think that this is a substantive policy thing at all. I just think it's funny to see that they want Operation Warp Speed, and then simultaneously, nearly 36 House Democrats on Monday called on Biden to relinquish his sole authority to launch nuclear weapons in the latest appeal to reform the command and control structure so that no single person can initiate a nuclear war. Thank you for indulging me. I thought it was funny. Maybe it's not that funny, but it is an important issue, and I think this sort of spurs an interesting debate. So number one, why is this now just coming up? Okay, we had Donald Trump, who, according to many out there, was a maniacal Hitlerian maniac, and he was going to cause World War XI. That's how bad he was. And then we have these sort of groundbreaking Middle Eastern peace deals. Things with North Korea died down. China was on the defensive. Now they are literally sticking swabs up the rear ends of our diplomats over there. There's a new headline over there from the Daily Mail. I didn't get a chance to clip it, but they had to do the anal swabs. So now Trump leaves office, and now China is literally cramming swabs up our diplomats' rears. So that's a nice little change in policy right there. So, a lot is going on, and and Politico is saying that the Democrats now want to revoke the president's ability to launch nuclear weapons. So let's get into the actual letter that went over to Joe. Why are they asking for him to relinquish that? Dear President Biden, we write to respectfully request that you consider modifying the decision-making process the United States uses in its command and control of nuclear forces. As president, two of your most critical and solemn duties are the security of the country and the safeguarding of its nuclear arsenal. You alone possess the authority to order the use of the nuclear weapons, which assures that nuclear weapons remain under civilian control. So you just got to stop and point that out, right? Your two most critical and solemn duties are the security of the country, no questions there, and the safeguarding of the nuclear arsenal. So what they're asking him to do is modify one of his most critical and solemn duties. Why would a president ever do that? Let's go in. However, vesting one person with this authority entails a real risk. Past presidents have threatened to attack other countries with nuclear weapons. They have a footnote, but I don't have that footnote. Or exhibited behavior that caused other officials to express concern about the president's judgment. So we do recall that when Trump was in office, right after the Capitol Hill riots, they did want to try to invoke the 25th Amendment. And we know that Nancy Pelosi, in what I consider to be an egregious separation of powers violation, went and talked to the Joint Chiefs and the other cabinet members and said, we need to wrest away nuclear control from Donald Trump, which I condemned at that time. I think it was totally inappropriate. He's still the president at that time, just like Joe Biden is the president here. And in my opinion, he has the sole authority, as he should. We'll get more into that. But what they're saying is that they want to divest him of that. This has happened previously, but now they're asking the president to voluntarily relinquish that stuff. So while any president would presumably consult with advisors before ordering a nuclear attack, there is no requirement to do so. The military is obligated to carry out the order if they assess it as legal under the laws of war. Under the current posture of the new U.S. nuclear forces, that attack would happen in minutes, which is kind of the point, right? That's the point. We have a commander-in-chief to make split-second decisions. That's the entire point. I think they're missing it. You don't want this big, massive bureaucratic nightmare called Congress to interfere with all of this stuff. If Joe Biden wants to launch a nuke and he's got the capabilities to do that, well, that's what the country has decided. We have elected that individual to control that. And so in my opinion, I don't think that this is anything that should ultimately happen. I think Joe has the full lawful authority to do it, but let's see what their alternatives are. So this comes over here. Several alternatives seeking to reduce risks inherent in the present system have been proposed, including, so number one, requiring additional officials in the line of presidential succession, starting with the vice president and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, neither of whom can be removed by the president if they disagree, to concur with a launch order and utilizing the Federal Emergency Management Agency's tracking of those officials to ensure prompt communication. So they want to use FEMA to monitor the Speaker of the House as well as the Vice President. So that would be Kamala Harris, and there would also be Nancy Pelosi along with Joe Biden. So now you have these three yahoos up there saying, hey, should we launch the nuke? I don't know. Call Joe. I don't know. Call Nancy. I don't know. Call Kamala. All right. We all agree. Launch those puppies. Next, another potential solution, requiring certifications from the Secretary of Defense that the launch order is valid and from the Attorney General that it is legal. Concurrence from the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of State could also be required. So now we're looking at the president. Theoretically, you could add in the Speaker of the House. You could also add in the Vice President. So that's 3 people plus the Secretary of Defense. That's 4. Attorney General, that's 5. Chair of the Joint Chiefs, that's 6. Secretary of the State, that's 7. Requiring a congressional declaration of war and specific authorization from Congress before any nuclear attack can be conducted, which is a disaster of an idea, in my opinion, right? Like I said, that is just awful. First and foremost, Congress is garbage. They don't do anything that doesn't serve them directly. So if it's not in their interest to launch it? Well, I'm not sure that they would do it. I'm not in favor of nuclear war, by the way, right? I do not want nuclear bombs going off anywhere in this country anytime ever. But the point here, it's about, I think, operational security. And now you've got a bunch of Congresspeople, which are just the worst. And so now you want to say, well, they already can't get anything done in this country. So we want to vest the defense of the United States nuclear arsenal in the hands of these people. I would pass on that one. And also, I think it sort of waters down the liability for it, the ownership of it. When you have the nuclear arsenal under control of the president, if anything happens with a nuclear bomb, if anybody launches a nuclear weapon, who's responsible for that? The president. Joe Biden is. If Donald Trump did it, Donald Trump's responsible for it. That's why it's a commander in chief. The buck stops with that person. When you divest that role from the commander in chief and you give that back over to Congress, well, now you just have sort of a diffusement of responsibility. Everybody kind of just joins in on the bandwagon. Well, we voted to launch it. Oh, both houses of Congress did. So you have 435 House of Representatives, 100 senators, and now they can all sort of diffuse responsibility for it. Well, it wasn't just me, Everybody voted for it. So don't blame me for that. It's a lot of that. People kind of hide in the shadows, hide in the cracks. And we don't want that when we're talking about something so significant. If Joe Biden wants to launch a nuke, well, history's going to hang that albatross around his neck for a very long time, a peaceful albatross. And that is going to be something that he's going to have to live with. It's going to be part of his legacy. So if he wants to operate that way, all right, that's fine. He's going to take full ownership of it rather than divesting that and diffusing responsibility amongst Congress. Lastly, creating a permanent active council of congressional leaders that would regularly participate in deliberations with the executive branch on vital national security issues and mandate some portion of the council be consulted before the first use of nuclear weapons. We note your distinguished record and leadership on nuclear arms control and non-proliferation as a senator and vice president. We ask you to lead again. As president, you will have the final say on any changes of the U.S. nuclear policy. We respectfully request that you, as president, review ways in which you can end the sole authority you have over to launch a nuclear attack and install additional checks and balances into the system. Thank you for your consideration of this matter. Signed off on by two Congresspeople, Jimmy Panetta and Ted Lieu, who is very active in Trump's impeachment proceedings. So I think it's a horrible idea. I think it's a stupid decision. I think it's a ridiculous question, and I would be upset if it were any president. I think what they're trying to do is blur the lines between the legislative branch and the executive branch. When we're talking about armed forces, when we're talking about the defense of this country, we need one commander in chief. We need an executive branch. It was created for that reason and delegated those responsibilities for that reason. Whether you like Joe Biden or not, it's kind of irrelevant. That position is suitable for that role, should not be divested into Congress. And I'm getting pretty tired of a lot of this sort of, well, we're just sort of one big global government now. We can all kind of do whatever we want. Legislatures can do whatever the executive wants to do. Congress does. It's all just a big gray, muddled mess without any real clear delineation on who's responsible for what and where the buck stops. So ultimately, I think that this is not a good idea, and I would support Joe Biden saying, yeah, thanks for that, but no thanks. Not going to give up one of my only sole and critical and solemn responsibilities to you people over there in Congress. Not going to happen, and I hope Joe Biden just tells them to take that letter and shred it right in the shredder, because it's not going to happen. So we got a couple questions on this. Sharon Quidney says, hey, Robert, I get it. You want to stay on the tube, so that's okay. Even if it means that folks can't be as honest or as open as we would like, can we still stay on locals here, or do we have to go back to the tube? So we are all, of course, going to stay on locals. Yeah, locals is the long-term platform. That's the end game, ultimately, right? I mean, that's where I think we're going to have the most free conversations. I'm still trying to figure out a way to sort of create some more content and get a little bit more engaged over there, but I'm trying to juggle a couple different things. Here at the office, of course, we run a law firm here. And so, I'm trying to, if we do get remonetized, by the way, then we can bring in on some additional help and create more content and do more interesting things, which is why I really want to do that, because I think that's in the longer term interest of the show. And a lot of that, locals.com will be the primary beneficiary of all of that stuff, because there are topics that we just can't talk about here on this platform, which is a major bummer. And so we want to find different venues where we can do those and have those conversations. Sharon says it would be great to have a place where we can all be as honest as we would like to be. Well, that's my vision for locals. Honestly, there are a lot of other creators on there who are provocative, and they say certain things and they talk about issues that I think are critically important, but you just can't speak about on certain platforms. And that's a bummer. I think it really just hurts free speech in America, and it's disappointing that we're trending that direction. But ultimately, I think that individuals on the internet will find their own homes. And when people start to realize that the real conversations are happening in places where there is maybe some objectionable speech, some triggering speech, some whatever they want to define as dangerous information, those are the interesting conversations. I was in a Clubhouse room the other day, and I know I keep talking about Clubhouse, but I was in a Clubhouse room the other day, and there were a bunch of people in there talking sort of just very, very mutedly. And I don't mean just by volume, but I mean, they were not able to talk freely. Somebody got on the Clubhouse stage and they started talking, and they said, listen, before I get into my story, just a trigger warning for anybody out there in the room that I'm going to be talking about some issues involving me and my father. And if that brings up any bad memories for anybody else. And it went on for like 10 minutes. This guy just talking. I'm like, get to the friggin' point already. What are you going to say? But it's being very careful with your language, and that is, it's not real conversation. It's a lot of people trying to be, to sort of play, tickle me Elmo with each other, when let's get into it. What do you want to talk about? Let's get it out and verbally duke it out. And so when more and more individuals see where those conversations are happening, I think they're going to flock to those venues. And Clubhouse is where they're happening right now, quite frankly, which is why I've been talking about it so much. We have Ma Fox says, I lost my grandmother to Alzheimer's. I'm sorry, Ma. I hope I didn't hurt your feelings by talking about this in that way. I do think it is a very serious issue. And it really is just awful when you can see. I haven't had anybody in my life who's gone through it, but I have seen people go through it, and it's just terrible to see sort of, their physical body is still there, but their mind is not there. It's heartbreaking. So I'm sorry. Let's get back to your comment. I lost my grandmother to Alzheimer's. Just like the cop that gave you the best gift in your life, seeing your loved ones like that is something that never leaves you and poisons your memories of them. To see them in that state, it's awful. It is, Mom. Like I said, I haven't had anybody as close to me as a family member go through that, but I have been friends with people, and I've had people in certain groups that I've been a part of have other individuals just, sort of go out slowly that way. And it's heartbreaking. There's a story of a friend of mine married for, I think, 50 years, and his wife is in the middle of that right now. And he's just, what do you do? Because they're still alive. They're still there, but they're not there. And it's heartbreaking. So, I hope you're doing well. I hope you're dealing with that in a way that's healthy for you, because it is traumatizing, and it's something that I truthfully would like to see a cure for. And we'll see if the government's the best venue to do that. But the point here is, reduce your risk factors. Okay. It sounds like there's some pretty good evidence that if you take care of yourself, you can reduce the risk factor of that significantly, not by like 8%, like 40%. It's a big deal. So thanks for sharing that, Ma. I appreciate your vulnerability on that. Cattle Caregiver says, does anyone in government know that billions and trillions means? On a bunny trail off that, the 1.9 trillion stimulus they are pushing, I heard that will raise the national debt 14,000 or 14 trillion for people under 50,000 a year to get 1,400. So as you know, Cattle Caregiver, I am not a math person. There's a lot of numbers in that comment, and so that was a little bit overwhelming for me. But we're going to get through it. Yeah, the government just prints money. They just spend money. And right now we're in this phase where they're not seeing much inflation from all of the printing, allegedly. So they just keep printing. They just say, no, inflation's not that big of a deal. So print another 1.9 trillion, print another billion, another 20 billion, 100 billion, whatever it takes to get things back on the track. Let's see here. We got NY Renal MD, the doctor's in the house, says, a lot of people may not like this. The alcohol issue is a problem. There is no benefit to alcohol. The only benefit comes from the grapes from wine. You can take resveratrol to get more benefits. Alcohol and drug use contribute heavily to dementia and mental illness. And you're right. I think, and doctor, a lot of people will not like that. And I used to be a big drinker. And, I was sort of part of the law culture. Law school for me was, and for most of the people in there, for a lot of people, well, it wasn't like this for me, but for a lot of people, it was sort of the continuation of their undergrad years. They wanted to just go and continue partying. So a lot of drinking, a lot of drug use in law school, surprisingly. I tried to keep a straight and narrow, but I was still drinking. And then as I got into law, it sort of, got a hold of me. And then after my brother died, it became a coping mechanism for me. And I was drinking very heavily until I decided to kick that. My life is a million times better. I feel great basically all the time, most of the time. Sleep better. My productivity has gone up. My mental, it feels like I was numbing myself by, 50 IQ points, literally, while I was drinking alcohol. And I did a lot of positive things on it. I mean, I built a law firm. I, won trials. I did a lot of good stuff as a functional alcoholic, but it's significantly better now. But when people will ask me very regularly, Rob, how did, you're like a different person. How did you do all this? How is this all working for you? And I said, you know what? The number one thing is I stopped drinking alcohol. They all say, I'm not going to do that. And I say, okay, well, that's your decision, right? You have a decision to make. It's a hard decision. You're not going to like it, but I agree 100% with you, Renal MD. I used to sort of make excuses for myself to drink. I work hard. I can have an excuse on this stuff. And when I cut it out, and I cut it out for a long enough period of time that I sort of eliminated that bad habit out of my lifestyle, everything got better, significantly better. And I know from experience, from working with other men and women who've gone through addiction, that sometimes that you can't escape that. And that just is something that you live with for a long period of time. A lot of sort of progression in that alcoholism disease or that drug use disease, and it does not go well. I've worked with guys who have said, I see a doctor like once a week. I've got problems with my eyes, my stomach, my head always hurts. I've got this and all these physical ailments. My liver's not working. My kidneys aren't working. My enzymes are all out of whack. And we say, well, are you still drinking? And they say, well, yeah, I mean, I drink like a fifth of vodka every single night. And we go, there's your problem. Hello. But they just can't break the grips of it. And I know because I was in those grips for a long period of time. But nowadays people are drinking more. They're drinking at home. It's almost socially acceptable. I've seen a lot of memes on the internet, on Facebook and elsewhere. Hey, it's 12 o'clock somewhere, quarantine wine night. And you're just going, all right, I get it. It's kind of funny until it's not funny anymore. And then you start to see the long-term ramifications of it. And you as a doctor know it as well. So it's a serious thing that I think is that needs more attention. And so that's why I wanted to pause and talk about it. Jeremy Matrita says 2 steps to improve one's overall health: get outside, get fresh air, and exercise. Great point, Rob. The government creates the problem, then says it needs massive amounts of money to fix it. And they do that very regularly. Yeah, we're going to lock everybody down. And now we need to, we need to cure Alzheimer's because we just caused it. Now we got to deal with it. At least they're trying to fix it, apparently. We got Seji in the house. Good to see you, Seji. Says, well, why not do Medicare for all and focus on dementia and old timers that way? It's Alzheimer's, not old timers. Is the government able to actually pass Medicare for all, given that the Constitution's preamble says promote, not provide for the general welfare? I wanted to try and be an opposing voice and ended up opposing myself. It's kind of hard to be an opposing voice, Seji. Thank you for the attempt. It's hard. I don't mean that like everything I say is without fault and that there is no oppositional opinion to that. I just mean it's hard to sort of change gears a little bit because you're recognizing the contradictions and you're trying to argue the contradiction, but then you recognize it. And so I appreciate the attempt there, Seji. Good effort. Is the government able to do it? I think that the government would do it sort of on top of the question that you're asking is it a right or a mandate? Right, so you have sort of certain rights under the Constitution. If the government came out and said we have an obligation to provide healthcare for all, that would be a constitutional question. And it actually was a constitutional question back during the Obamacare years. And they said, yeah, it is constitutional under the purview of a tax. The Constitution gives us the ability to tax. And so we're going to just lump this giant boondoggle of a healthcare plan under the tax and spend authority. And that's how we got it. So, the original Constitution may not say specifically based on the language that you're talking about here, promote, not provide, general welfare. It's a different provision. And in the healthcare case, it came out of the taxing power. Another one from Zeji says, I think that Biden should be the only one with his finger over the button. Just hover it there. Speak like a North Korean. president. Yeah, Joe Biden has been working really hard to get those nuclear codes. I mean, he's been in government for like 37 years, longer than I've been alive. Now he finally gets that code. He finally is able to sit behind that resolute desk with his finger on the button, and the Democrats want to take it away from him. That's how egregious. Jeremy Matrita said the Constitution laid out a separation of powers for a reason. President Biden should stand his ground and never give up power. Yeah, so I agree. I don't think he should. He should not give up that power. Underscore Shade says, not to worry about Biden nuclear codes anymore. SolarWinds gave them out already. Zing. Yeah, SolarWinds have them, apparently. They've already got them. All under their control, and we all forgot about that story. Apparently not a big deal. Nadar Blasier says, Biden also promised to cure cancer while in office, so there's that. I believe he did. I would imagine that he did. And I would imagine that currently it's looking like he said a lot of things that really aren't going to kind of get into the policy conversations that are taking place around the country. I would love him to cure cancer. If Joe Biden cures cancer, I'm going to be team Joe Biden. All right. I can't stand that disease. NY Renal MD, the doctor again, says if anyone is paying attention to the Capitol Hill riot hearings, the board of 3 officials that could call in the National Guard could not communicate to actually get the request off the ground. So we want to do the same for our security. Yeah, that's a great point there. Yeah, we did talk about that. Everybody's pointing their fingers at each other. And now we want to add and introduce more bureaucracy into our national security infrastructure. I'm not a particular fan of Joe Biden or Kamala or Nancy Pelosi or any of those people, but Joe is still the commander in chief. I'm not going to do hashtag not my president for 4 years. We've got Croc1 Alpha says in China, Iran, Pakistan, and Russia on board with their legislative changes to protect their launch codes, mutually assured and all. Is China, Iran, Pakistan, and Russia on board? I'm going to guess no, right? They probably are not going to be modifying their internal policies to be as bureaucratic as ours. That's not what this is for. The nuclear, it's not a committee. Could you ever have a committee in Congress that says, hey, well, it's been about 2.5 months since they attacked us, and we've done a number of investigations. We have a lot of commissions, and we've done a deep study on this. Who wants to nuke China? Anybody? Is that ever going to happen? I don't want to nuke China either. Maybe that's the point, right? We don't launch nukes ever. But it's important that your enemy knows that you have the capability to do it. That's the point. They need to know that it's Uncle Joe up there with his finger on the button. And quite frankly, is that really the case? So what Ted Lieu and the other guy, what they're asking for is to just layer in all of these different triggers, right? All of these different light switches that have to go off before the codes can go. Both people got to turn their keys. All right, we got the concept. But is that in reality how this works? Does Joe Biden, does he have a button on his desk that he just goes, all right, that's it. Bye China, bye North Korea, bye Iran, bye whatever? No. Right, he picks up the phone, calls the Joint Chiefs. There's several different layers, many different fail-safes. I don't know what they are, but I know that they're there. And that is the mechanism. There are safeguards in place. I think that this is probably more than anything, just more political bloviating from our Congresspeople. Seji also says, as a Japanese, I want to express my voice over how America handles its nukes. If these other countries have a say as well, I say keep it with the president. Well, there you go. Right? Japanese Seji. Thank you for that. And I've never seen that sort of expressed that way as a Japanese versus as sort of somebody who's Japanese. So Japanese is a noun. I've never seen it that way. Learned something new. Hack Consulting says, if they do succeed in obfuscating nuke responsibility, can a private citizen sue the breach of the Constitution? Can anyone sue a breach of the balance of powers? Big issue to do this. Makes it easier to use nukes without someone specific to point fingers at. Yeah, good point there, Hack. That was my point, is that, Congress would diffuse responsibility and there's no responsibility. Okay, if everybody's responsible, if all 535 of our elected officials in Congress are responsible for this, or a committee's responsible for it, or if it's Kamala and Nancy and the Joint Chiefs, and we've got the Secretary of State and the Attorney General and all of the other 7 people that they listed there, now it's sort of it's a diffusing of responsibility, whereas I think it should be set with one person. As to the other question that you answered, They are, no, you can't sue the government for those political questions unless you have a stake, unless there's some sort of damage to you personally. Remember that a lot of these, even election litigation cases, were thrown out based on standing, mootness, ripeness, wrong venue, wrong forum, all of those different sort of standing issues. If you wanted to go in and say, hey, Ted, we're going to sue you for trying to take away the executive branch, well, you wouldn't be able to do that as a private citizen. Now, Joe Biden could do that, or his administration could initiate a claim or an injunction, a lawsuit-ish against the Congress and have a court settle some of this stuff out. That's why we have the separation of powers, so that when there's a disagreement between the two branches, like the executive and the legislative branch, the courts can come in and sort that out. But you do know that, Hack, and I understand your point. I wasn't trying to oversimplify it or make a sort of a reductionist argument, but I think that your question is a good one. A lot of people know, well, what can we do about any of this stuff? And the answer is not much, because it's all political. The real answer is vote. Osak says, hey, Rob, do you think this is a start to remove Biden? So I've sort of put my stake in the ground on that as happening after the 2022 elections. I think that at that moment, you're going to see this real hard pivot where they're going to really be beefing up Kamala's resume, when you're going to start to see that maybe Joe Biden's not cut out for the 2024 campaign. And so they're going to sort of just retire him a little bit. Kamala's going to take more of the spotlight, more of the front line, and we're going to start see her beefing up her resume so that she is the de facto candidate moving into 2024. That would be a prediction. That would be a guess. I think that would be an interesting development politically, but we'll see what happens. We've got Sharon says, we would be nuked out of existence before Congress ever managed to do anything. In times of emergency, handling national security over to a bunch of bureaucrats is insane. I agree with that, Sharon. Well put. Seji in the House says, can I sue as a foreigner if the American Constitution is having its balance of powers unchecked? I'm unsure how this works in practice. Just the theory that the branches figure it out by asserting themselves. So no, I don't think that you could sue, again, unless you were damaged from it, unless you were somebody who was sort of in the process and you are actually harmed, then you might have a claim because you're a party to the underlying issue. You can't just go and insert yourself into something because you don't like the policy of it, of the politics of it. Because otherwise, you think about that just in terms of incentives. Everybody would be suing the government for everything if you allowed those types of cases to move forward. So you would have to... You can't do that. You just got to get involved politically. Good question, though, Seji. We got Nadarb says, yeah, I don't even like the idea of having a House Speaker or Senate leader because it makes my representation worth less than those represented by Nancy Pelosi. So the idea of giving Nan and Chucky more power and taking more power from my rep is not okay with me. And I totally agree with that. I mean, right now what it seems like is we just have a lot of sort of pawns in Congress, and they just all do the bidding of whatever the majority leader wants to do. And it's Republicans and the liberals and Democrats are both guilty of that. And I agree with you. I think that, I was listening to Matt Gaetz in a clubhouse last night, and somebody asked him a question. What do you think about taking this back down to the original sort of cap under the original Constitution, which says that we have a much higher number of representatives? Remember that there was no cap in the official House of Representatives of 435. That's not in the original Constitution. That was modified by amendment. And so the idea here is, well, what if we pulled that back? What if we sort of were taking a more originalist approach to what the Constitution said, and we should have one representative for every certain number of individuals that exist in this country. And if we modified that today for 370 million Americans, we'd have thousands of representatives in the House. And so I kind of like that idea, quite frankly. I think that it's more proportional representation, which is exactly what the House of Representatives is for. It's for proportional representation. Remember, the Senate came around with this agreement between during the founding era where they said, if the big states at the time, like New York, they're going to have all of the representatives. And so they're going to be able to control everything that happens in Congress. And so the smaller states said, no, we don't want that. We don't have as many people. We're going to have less representatives. We want equal representation. And so they came up with this dual House approach where the Senate now gives equal representation to each state regardless of population. And so one is supposed to be not representative. One is supposed to be one per state or two per state in the terms of the Senate. But under the House, it was supposed to be proportional representation. And now that representation has been watered down dramatically. Back in the 1700s, you may have had one representative for 50,000 people because it was tied directly to population. Now, because there's a cap on it, you still get that same proportion, but to a much bigger, broader population base. So now it's not 1 to 50,000. It's 1 to, I don't know, what does Arizona have? 11, I think. That might change after the census. And we've got 7 million people. So maybe 1 to 800,000 or whatever that math looks like. And that's a big number. So now my proportion of democracy for my representative is watered down dramatically, because one representative to 800,000 people is a lot different than one representative to 50,000 people. So if we wanted to beef up the House of Representatives, that would give us more direct representation in Congress. Matt Gaetz was asked that question, and he said, no, we need less. He said, no, we don't want any more people in Congress. We want less. I would be inclined, he said, I don't want more bureaucrats. I want less bureaucrats. So I would be inclined to reduce the number of people in the House of Representatives, which doesn't make any sense to me. And it would basically create a second Senate where we have these oligarchs who, once they're elected, they stay in office for 37 years like Joe, and they just sort of build a little power base. And then we have all of these other pawns who come back into Congress, and they're just like little puppets being maneuvered around by Pelosi, by McConnell, by Schumer, by everybody who is in the upper echelon of the power structure. And Tulsi Gabbard, I think, on Joe Rogan's show, she was talking along the same lines on this issue. And she said, listen, when I got into Congress, they said Democrats over there, Republicans over there, everybody just shut up and fall in line, essentially was her point. We're not there to do anything to rock the boat. We're there to follow the plan that is in place by the leadership. And if you deviate from that plan, you're going to lose all of the protection of the party. And so that's why we have just this obstinate, ineffective Congress that everybody's unhappy with. And now they want to give the nuclear codes over to them. No, thanks. We're good. Sarah Smothers, is any of the legislation being passed around really surprising when one political affiliation controls almost all branches of government? They act like they are one branch because they are the one government branch in power. Yeah, that's a good point and a nice way to summarize that, I think, Sarah. I actually like that, right? It's all sort of the multiple heads of the same hydra, right? They're all sort of operating off of the same base, and it's just they're sort of doing a dance with themselves to try to figure out how to get this stuff passed and in play. And so, I don't know if Joe Biden welcomed that letter or what his response to it will be, but it does feel like a little kind of game of patty cake there for the time being. And I think the news reflects that. The news has been largely pretty boring, which is why you're seeing them not get so angry at Joe and his administration, but they're going after Cuomo. They're going after Newsom. They're going after Ron DeSantis in Florida. I mean, the governors now are getting a microscope on them because it's just sort of kid gloves now at the federal level, at least for the time being, until the honeymoon period wears off. Cats59 says the Supreme Court's weakened and the president's roles are in question. The House and the Senate becoming the new parliament. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think the Supreme Court is weakened. We think we saw that with a number of their orders. They're not taking on important issues that I think they should. We saw a very, I would say, poignant defense from Judge Thomas on the Supreme Court. Very upset with some of the election litigation claims that were brought forward that the court refused to hear. I think it's going to be a recurring issue. It's going to be repeatable. We're going to see it again. We're going to have more election problems. And the Supreme Court, because they are concerned about losing their legitimacy, and they're probably also very fearful that the federal government is going to make threats to pack the court, that they have just decided to just basically withdraw from the conversation entirely. We have Bumma Lickett says, free speech is not so free nowadays. Most of the time, I find myself minding what I say. Hopefully one day I can find the courage and be brave and speak my mind. I would really encourage you to think about that. Bumma Lickett. I would. I think that more people need to stand up and speak. I encourage a lot of people in my life to do that. I know it's not possible for everybody. I know that not everybody has the freedom to do that. But if you can work your way towards that, I think that your life will be more meaningful personally for you, not to me, but I mean to yourself personally. If you feel like you are living a muted life and you're allowing society to act upon you, that doesn't sound very fulfilling to me. I have lived like that. And what gives me some creative energy and what gives me some hope and motivation to wake up and do the things that I do in my life is because I feel like I'm being of service to the world. I'm being authentic to myself, and I'm acting with integrity. And those are my values. And if I operate according to those values, then life gets better, and it has gotten better for me. And so I think living in sort of this state of fear is necessary. You want to be cognizant of that, right? If you're going to get fired from your job from starting a YouTube channel, you certainly don't want to do that. But at the same time, if you can start navigating and building the life that you want, where you are enabled to have a little bit more free speech, then you may feel more fulfilled in the long term. Seji also says, it sounds like Obama was pushing an insurance plan and not a healthcare plan. An insurance plan would be a tax plan, though not a healthcare plan. Yes, so Obama was pushing an insurance plan or a healthcare plan. It was a government program that mandated that people go in and buy an insurance policy on the open market where there were providers selling plans. It was a mandate. And the Supreme Court said, you're allowed to do that. It's just like a tax. It's just like you are mandated to pay income tax every year. Same type of concept. They just sort of use that same authority under the government, under the tax power, and they applied that to healthcare, which I think was a catastrophic mistake, but that's the Supreme Court. All right, great questions. Had a lot to say about those. Thank you for those. Very, very interesting questions. And I think those are important issues. You know, a little bit of a divergence from some of the criminal law stuff, but very important nonetheless. I think that it's important to understand how our government is functioning and what incentives they are creating. And a lot of that has to do directly to health. And, you know, we are sometimes short-sighted on that. We kind of forget about that. It's kind of one of the first things we forget about because we're more concerned about losing our business, losing our relationships, what's happening to our kids. And so sometimes we'll just neglect our own health. And it's very important. You can't protect your kids. You can't protect your business if you're not healthy and well. And the government plays a role in that by how they dictate what we do with our lives. And so we just got to hold them accountable on that end as well. All right. So next story up. We've spent a lot of time talking about Ghislaine Maxwell on this channel. She is, as we all know, hopefully by this point, she is currently being charged with a whole slew of different crimes for her involvement with Jeffrey Epstein. She is currently incarcerated out in southern New York, and her case is being moved forward in the Southern District of New York. She has tried to get out of custody twice already, and she just recently filed through her attorneys a new request to get out of custody. Ghislaine Maxwell is doing everything she can to get out. And there's some interesting stuff in here that I think is worth highlighting because it's going to start, we're getting closer and closer to a trial date. I'm going to show you what's coming up in her case, but we're going to be able to, we can glean some of the arguments that her team is going to be making as the trial nears. So this is another memorandum, as you can see, memorandum in support of Ghislaine Maxwell's third motion for release on bail. And the judge up until this time, so it's the USA versus Ghislaine Maxwell out of the Southern District of New York, filed 2 days ago, the 23rd, 9 pages. We're not going to cover the whole thing, but I do want to talk about a few things. And this is the third attempt, which is a lot. And you know, you can't just keep filing motions like this over and over and over again. You got to make new arguments. You got to make new concessions, and you typically have to do it after there's been a material change in circumstances, after something has changed dramatically. You've got some new defenses, new evidence has been uncovered, society has changed dramatically, right? There were a lot of people who pre-COVID were absolutely not allowed out. But when COVID came around, judges said, all right, we got to let them out because of the risk that person might face in custody. So if society changes, yeah, you can file a renewed motion. It was denied previously because it didn't make sense previously, but now it does make sense, and so we'll reconsider it. So that's what they're doing now. They're on their third attempt. They're doing everything they can to get Ghislaine out of custody, and the judge thus far, I think rightfully so, has just denied, because they know that she is a flight risk. And so think about what we're talking about getting her out on bail. Currently, she's in custody. What they're asking for is to say, if she posts this amount of money up, if she gives us $30 million, if we give the court $30 million, will you just let her out of custody? Okay, that $30 million is collateral. It means that she's going to come back to court. If she doesn't come back to court, you can keep that money and you can also use it to go get her again, right? When you see some of those bounty hunters on the TV shows and they help people post bond, that's kind of what we're talking about. You have these, federal marshals and these agents flying all over the place to capture people. It's because the court wants them. They have absconded. They've broken their release conditions. They were supposed to come back to court and they didn't. So now they go and they get captured. And so that's what Ghislaine is trying to do. She's doing everything we can everything she can to get out of custody. Why? Well, because jail's terrible. You don't want to be in jail. Is it just that, though? Does she just want to go home and spend time with her puppy or something? Or is there a higher risk here that maybe she'll leave? And so that's the court's primary interest. They want to make sure that people are returning to court. They want to make sure that they're not a flight risk. They want to make sure that they're not a danger to the community. And so what we're going to see is what Maxwell's attorneys are proposing the third time to get out. Let's take a look. So the attorneys say that they respectfully submit this memorandum in support of her third motion for bail. As we've stated on numerous occasions, and we reaffirm here, Ghislaine Maxwell has no intention or desire to leave this country. She's an American citizen, lived in the U.S. for 30 years, strong family ties. So see, they're trying to show you that she's not a risk of leaving because she's got 30 years here. She's got strong family ties. She's got the support in friends and family who live in this country. She wants nothing more than to remain in the U.S. under whatever conditions the court deems necessary so that she can effectively prepare for trial and vigorously defend against the 25-year-old charges in the indictment. Right? It's a good excuse. It's a good argument. Prepare for trial. All right. Maxwell has already proposed an expansive and, to our knowledge, unprecedented set of bail conditions that would reasonably assure her appearance. And I agree with this, which is why I wanted to cover it. It is unprecedented. As far as I can tell, right? There may have been a bigger proposal elsewhere in this country, but this is a big one. In light of the court's denial of that application that they submitted previously at docket 106, Ms. Maxwell now proposes 2 additional bail conditions to supplement the extraordinarily restrictive bail package that she has already offered. So I don't remember off the top of my head what they were, but it was big. Basically, they're going to put up all her homes, put up something, I think it was like $30 million, make sure that she's checking in with a bunch of people. I mean, it was a big, big package. A lot of money, a lot of resources, a lot of assets as collateral. And now they're adding on to that. First, Maxwell will renounce her French and British citizenship to eliminate any opportunity for her to seek refuge in those countries if the court so requires. Second, Ms. Maxwell will have her and her spouse's assets, excluding funds earmarked for living expenses, for legal fees and other expenses, to defend against her criminal charges and civil lawsuits. They're going to place all of that in a new account that will be monitored by a retired federal district court judge and former United States attorney who will function as asset monitor and will have a co-signing authority over the account, which is just, I mean, it's impressive from a defense attorney's perspective that they've got this all orchestrated out. They've got a federal district court judge, a former retired district court judge. They've already went out and had negotiations with this man or woman, and they're saying, we need you to kind of get involved in this Ghislaine Maxwell case. Not only that, but then they went over to somebody else, a former U.S. attorney who presumably was a prosecutor, maybe, to also get involved. And so they're creating this, it's a beautiful package, truthfully. Like, this is very enticing for a judge. And so those are the 2 conditions. The former condition goes well beyond the extradition waivers that the court deemed insufficient and satisfy any concerns. So Ghislaine Maxwell signed a bunch of extradition waivers apparently in different jurisdictions so that they could just send her right back. It should satisfy any concerns that the court may have that Ms. Maxwell may try to seek a safe haven in France or the United Kingdom. As a non-citizen, Ms. Maxwell will not be able to avail herself of any protections against extradition that may apply to citizens of those countries. So she's currently a citizen in France and in Britain, and she's going to renounce those citizenship. So if she does renounce those, then they cannot prevent her from being extradited. The latter condition will restrain Ms. Maxwell's assets so they cannot be used for flight or harboring her outside of the jurisdiction of this court. This should satisfy the court's concerns that the proposed bond was not fully secured and left assets unrestrained that could be used for such purposes. So they are going to just take all of those, basically everything, put them into a bucket and say that a former district court judge and a U.S. attorney are going to monitor those things. So I guess my question would be, if I were the judge, is this the true extent? Is this the true scope of all of your assets? Or are there other things out there that we have no knowledge of? Okay, so what if you throw 100 million of assets into an account, but she's got another 100 million in some Russian bank account that nobody knows about? Okay, fine, take the 100, let me out. I'm gonna go to Russia. Bye. I've got plenty of money elsewhere. Does the judge know that? I don't know. But I'll tell you this, from a judge's perspective, what they're doing is they just continue to chip away at the judge's objection. So the judge says, no, well, in your second proposal, you made all of these concessions, reviewed them, and I still think there's some holes in your argument. So the defense is coming back again and saying, well, we closed those holes up. Those are all sewed up. Now what, judge? Now what's your problem? Let her out. This continues. In addition, since the last bail hearing, Ms. Maxwell has submitted 12 pretrial motions that raise substantial legal and factual issues that may result in the dismissal of some or all of the charges against her. So this is where they have this change in circumstances. They have new evidence, they have new motions, they have new arguments. Something must have popped up somewhere that constitutes sort of a material change that justifies a third look, not a second look, at this request. She referenced some of these motions in her initial bail application, but was not in a position to fully articulate them until she had a chance to review the discovery and research the legal issues in advance of the motion deadline, which is a little bit sketchy, right? Is that accurate? You can kind of apply that to anything. Right, we didn't know that we could raise this point because we were still investigating it. It kind of can happen at any part of the stage. So kind of boilerplate, like typical language that you'll see in a motion like this. These motions significantly call into question the strength of the government's case against Ms. Maxwell and the underlying justification for continued detention. She's already been denied a fair chance in the court of public opinion. She has been maligned by the media, which has perpetuated a false narrative about her that has poisoned any open-mindedness and impartiality of a potential jury. All boilerplate stuff. You're going to see this in basically any high-profile case. She has been relentlessly attacked with vicious slurs, persistent lies, blatant inaccuracies by spokespeople who have neither met nor spoken to her. She's been depicted as a cartoon character villain in an attempt to turn her into a substitute replacement for Jeffrey Epstein. Yet Ms. Maxwell is determined and welcomes the opportunity to face her accusers at trial and clear her name. The additional proposed bail conditions should quell any concerns that she would try to flee. The court should therefore grant bail under the proposed conditions so that Maxwell can adequately prepare for trial. And so what you can see they're doing is they're setting up this argument for a mistrial, right? The judge is not going to let her out for good reason. And, I think Miss Maxwell is definitely a flight risk, right? If I were the judge and I saw what happened to Epstein and I saw sort of the class of individuals that she is a part of and the amount of escaping any criminal liability that she has been afforded over these last decades, would make me very concerned that she is a flight risk. And I would imagine that the judge does not let her out. And the defense attorneys know that. So what they're doing, as you can see in this last sentence, is they're saying that she must be released so that she can adequately prepare for trial. Well, when the judge doesn't release her and when the trial goes forward and she loses, the defense attorneys have already laid down the foundation for a due process argument. Well, of course we lost the trial. You didn't let her out. She couldn't prepare for trial. She was unprepared and you made us do a trial in which our client was not prepared. Therefore, we demand that you call this a mistrial if they're in the middle of a trial, or it's the subject of an appeal on the way up after they lose. And so you see they're just laying down the stepping stones so that they can reinvigorate that argument later down the line. Got a couple more slides, I think, in here. So they go into detail about this. Proposed additional bail conditions will assure that she'll be there. We've got that one. Renunciation of foreign citizenship. They're saying that as a standard condition of bail, all of her passports will be surrendered to the government. No further application will be made. She will formally commence the procedure to renounce her foreign citizenship. I think there's some conversation about whether they can do that. Can you renounce your French citizenship? I think I read somewhere that you can't actually do that. It's kind of a big, long process. So they're saying it may be expedited. Citizenship is a precious and priceless asset. She'll give it up even though it's from the country of her birth. She is very sincere, very earnest in her desire to comply with the release conditions. They're going to restrain and monitor her assets. So the court noted that the previous bond was not fully secured. They say that her spouse would still have several $1 million in unrestrained assets that she could use to leave the country. So to help with those concerns, we're going to take those also. We're going to create a monitorship that will place meaningful restraints on the assets that are not used to secure the bond while still allowing Maxwell to pay for her legal defenses and taxes. They're going to create a new account where they're going to hold all of that money. It's going to be deposited in this, quote, new account. Any proceeds from the sale of the house will go in there. They're going to pay legal fees and things like that. Other assets that they're going to grab are the money currently held in escrow by her attorney, $450,000 in her personal account. They're going to monitor and receive 5-day advance notice of any check, online payment, or transfer in the amount of any amount over $5,000. So if she exceeds that expenditure amount, boom, somebody's going to get involved. They'll know about it. The asset monitor will report to pretrial services, which is her monitoring agency, about all of that. They are asking this guy to do it. Honorable William S. Duffy. He's a retired judge. And we also have, it looks like, his bio is attached here as an exhibit. So these are some of the claims. They're saying that there was improperly obtained evidence that violated her Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights. Other motions want to seek a dismissal of the charges as being time barred, saying perjury charges are based on non-perjurious statements. And they say that they're going to win these motions on the merits. Court should grant bail under the Bail Reform Act, must be released on personal recognizance if they determine that it will not, if such release will not reasonably assure the appearance of a person is required or will endanger. So they're going to keep them if that happens. And of course, they're saying Ms. Maxwell doesn't do that. So the rest of this stuff is pretty boilerplate. In conclusion, they're asking that she be released. Court should grant bail to Ghislaine. Signed off on here by Bobby Sternheim, Christian Everdell, Jeffrey Pagliuca. And then we have another order from the judge that came out, and they're going to consider it. So on February 23rd, she filed her third motion for release. The government response is due by March 9th, and the defendant's reply is due by March 16th, signed off on by Allison J. Nathan, the U.S. District Court judge. And then this is what's happening here on these other motions. So all of this stuff is basically done and over with. Deadlines on all this is passed, but the response deadline here is, as we saw, this was filed on the 24th yesterday. The deadline is due on the 9th. Then we also see that there's another interesting thing happening. The release of the transcript that was restricted, that's also due on March 10th. So that'll be coming up next month. And then the reply, so the government is going to reply. That's due by March 9th. And then Ghislaine, because she started the motion, she has until the 16th to reply to the government's response. So she moves, government responds, then Ghislaine replies. 9th, 10th, 16th. And that's Ghislaine Maxwell. We'll see where that goes. Let's take some questions on it. We've got over from locals.com, which is where we're asking the questions. We got our first one from Wise One. Says, of course, she is a flight risk. They will kill her if she gets out. Yeah, I think that's one prospective outcome. I think that she also would leave, personally. She's got a lot of resources that I imagine people don't know about. We've got, let's see what happened. All right, we got Jen McClellan in the house. What's up, Jen? Says, wow, you can get motivated bounty hunters for $30 million. Yeah, you can. Really good. I might throw my hat into that ring. We could take this show on the road. I could be like Dog the Bounty Hunter, Rob the Bounty Hunter. I don't think I'm tall enough for that job. We got 0671 says, Rob, if Maxwell is let out on bond, she will bounce out for sure. So my question is, how do the courts figure out who gets out or not? Is it a set guideline? So we kind of just went through it. The court considers a lot. They consider flight risks, danger to the community, whether you have any prior offenses, what your capabilities are. A lot of the time they'll consider some of your external obligations. Do you have kids? Do you have a husband? Do you have a wife? Those types of things. And so the court here, I think rightfully so, is saying, no, there's basically nothing that we're going to do to let you out, because we know that there's a lot about you we don't know. And if we do let you out, you probably have the resources to just get up and bail. So it just depends. We have Nadarb. We got a meme in the house. We got Nadarb posting a picture is worth 1,000 words. And we have Curiosity over here as Bill Clinton. And then we have the cat. And you know what they say about Curiosity? It killed the cat. And so that meme is on point. Thank you there for that, Jeremy, or Nadarb. We have Seji says, so bond helps pay for those that have to get the person again. Seems like if I had to pay $35 million, I would flee because where did I get that debt to begin with? So so sort of. If you're posting it with a bond company, then yes, then the bond company is fronting the money to the court. And so if they want their money back, they're going to go send somebody to get you, bring you back to court so that they get their money back from the court. So I'm not sure what the specifics of Ghislaine's case are, but yeah, I mean, a big incentive. $35 million in the hands of somebody to go get you. That's a big one. Samantha Richardson says at R&R Law, I think maybe when you get older, you might want to have the option of being a judge and you should give it some real thought because you're exactly what we need in that area of law. Well, Samantha, first of all, that's a nice compliment. I appreciate the endorsement of my judicial abilities, but I'm not real sure that would be the best use of my time. And I don't think that I would last that long because I typically think that prosecutors are a big problem a lot of the time. And they don't like that. It's a political thing. I appreciate your endorsement on it, though. Don't think that's going to happen. Unless maybe I start a TV show like Judge Judy. Maybe when I'm 75, I'll Judge Robbie on there and I'll just be scolding people all day long. I could turn into that ornery old man. You never know. _Shade says, she is equal to or worse with Epstein, child traffickers. She is in elite category, which gives her many ways to help to get means. I want to see her current mugshot. So _Shades, that's kind of why I cover Ghislaine Maxwell. You'll notice on this show, I don't cover a lot of defendants. You know, typically I truly believe in the presumption of innocence. I do like to afford people due process. I don't like it when you sort of jump to conclusions and convict somebody before they've gone through trial, right? I think that her attorneys are doing a great job. And if they're making better arguments than the government, then they should be successful. If they have more evidence, if they present better arguments, they should be successful and the government should lose. I beat up on the government on this channel all the time. That's why it's called Watching the Watchers. The government is the watchers. But in this case, I think that Ghislaine is sort of a part of that upper echelon of society. People across this country are charged with crimes like this every day, all day. And this woman and Jeffrey Epstein, they escaped liability. You can, if you're a Democrat, you can blame that on a connection with Trump. If you're a Republican, you can blame that on a connection with Clinton. But the point here is that they're part of this just overarching power structure of billionaires, $100 millionaires. You know, they sort of operate in a different justice system than the rest of us. And so when somebody like that is now being put through the same mechanism that I've represented people on these types of cases, my firm has regularly, and they don't get the same benefits. Ghislaine has a whole different set of privileges that most people in this country don't get. And so it's nice to see that the establishment oligarchical power structure is now having to deal with one of their own, and that's why we're covering it. Liberty or Death says, Maxwell is very wealthy. It is easy to see that she is a flight risk given her history and ability, innocent until proven guilty, but that has to be weighed in consideration of bail. Exactly right. So spot on there, Liberty or Death. Presumption of innocence, due process. She's afforded all of those things. She should have a fair trial. She should have fair jurors of her peers-ish, and that's all essential, indispensable to our justice system. But you can't let her out of custody. No question about that. _Stage says, also, Epstein's money is still in flow. Someone is still transferring his assets. These people are a different elite rule. They're not like us. Exactly right. I agree with that completely, Shades. We have Hack Consulting says, Rob, if the rich can avoid taxes, I imagine if not detained, I imagine they can leave. Then again, if she got out of detainment and didn't flee, she likely has ways to drop this. Keep her in. Yep. There you go. So I think we're seeing a theme here. Everybody's sort of in agreement that she's got to stay in custody. I think that is absolutely the right move. I think the judge will do it. The defense attorneys know that. They're just planting the stake for a mistrial, for due process arguments further down the line. And then the last one on this segment, Liberty or Death says, I've been in martial arts for 30 years. I'm 6 foot tall. My instructor is about 5'5" and can break concrete with his fingers. So don't worry about how tall you are, Rob. I vote for Rob for the bounty hunter. All right. Well, I got your endorsement too there, Liberty or Death. So I'm gonna hit the weights extra hard. I'm gonna grow out a beard, a stash. I'm gonna wear a do-rag, get some aviator glasses, and I'm gonna go enforce justice. It'll be fun. So thank you for that, Liberty or Death, and thank you for that segment. Oh, that was a good one. All right, so last story of the day. Prisons. We talk about incarceration. We talk about how people are treated when they are arrested. I've long said that people who are going through the justice system, they deserve to be treated with dignity. I don't know why that's a complicated thing these days, but many people seem to think that it is. They seem to think that if you have been charged with a crime, you're automatically presumed guilty. If you are convicted of a crime, well, you're a criminal now. And so suddenly all of the benefits of human civility just fly out the window because you've committed some sort of a wrong. And, to be fair, I used to sort of think that way when I was younger in law school. I was a sort of a hard line. I wanted to be a prosecutor. I wanted to clean up the streets and throw everybody in jail. But when I started to work with people, you realize that the modern depiction, sort of this caricature of crime, is just not close to reality. Everybody thinks that it's, these hardened drug dealers out there slinging dope, killing each other, trying to mess up the streets. And that's just not the reality. I mean, most people who come through our office are good people. They're fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, and they have just been in one bad situation, or they have trauma from a life of abuse, or they have an addiction problem that they need some help with, or they have a mental illness. There are many, many different reasons why people are not in comportment with the normal functioning of society. A million different reasons. All of us have a lot of those same tendencies, just not to a degree that pushes us outside of the boundaries of the law and leads us to some criminality. Everybody who goes through the justice system, the punishment is that they're going through the justice system. I still think that they deserve basic human decency. This is why this story irritates the hell out of me. In Arizona, a federal judge fined a prison $1.4 million over a healthcare case. And we're going to go through this article in the context of 2018, 2017, and further back. They're getting penalized for behavior from those years. And as we all know, in 2020, we had the coronavirus that came through, ripped through the prisons, still ripping through the prisons throughout our justice system across this country. And so the standard of care, in my opinion, should have been higher. The prisoners, people who've gone into the justice system, they are typically the forgotten people. And in a situation where the entire country is now operating out of a sort of a scarcity mindset, trying to find toilet paper, trying to find the food, trying to find vaccines now, there is a segment of our society that is just necessarily forgotten. The first people to go are the people in prison. Some people think that's the way it should be. I don't. I think that we have a very strong responsibility to make sure that those people are cared for, because we as a society have taken them into our custody. And we have made a commitment. We're going to keep them alive. We're going to treat them in a way that is not cruel and unusual. We're going to afford them the basic necessities to live. And that didn't happen here in Arizona. $1.4 million, a judge fined. Now, you may say that's kind of small money. Typically on this show, we talk about billions of dollars. We just covered a story where the government wants another $300 billion for Alzheimer's. All right. This might be a small number, but this is a local issue. And the reason why I wanted to highlight this is because I'm going to guess, I don't practice in all of the other states in this country, but this is a common theme. When we had in Arizona, Sheriff Joe, remember him, so-called a self-anointed America's sheriff. We paid out as taxpayers tens of millions of dollars over his tenure. And for some reason, Arizona's just kept electing the guy. Cost a lot of money, more than necessary. And so if you're a fiscal conservative and you sort of want, have that tough on crime approach, you can think about it in terms of finances if you want. It's just as bad. But what's happening here is this court is now fining a prison for failing to provide proper health care to the people who are in the prison. And we're going to go through some of it. Stick with me on this because it's going to be kind of tedious. But I think the payoff is worth it when you understand that people are dying as a result of this negligence. And this story was broken, of course, by the great Jimmy Jenkins over at kjzz.org. So go check them out. They operate off of donations. So if you're feeling generous, give him a plug. He wrote this story. Federal judge has fined Arizona $1.4 million for failing to meet the healthcare standards in state prisons. This order was filed Friday. Magistrate Judge David Duncan wrote that the state had turned to a private contractor, which has been unable to meet the prisoners' healthcare needs. And so this also sort of pings another issue about private prisons. So in this case, it's a public prison using a private contractor to provide healthcare. There's a back and forth that went on with this private provider for years, saying you got to pick up the standard of care here. We have inmates here who need treatment. You're not giving it to them. So let's go through that in this context. A lot of people in prison. Arizona Department of Corrections farms out the healthcare provider to a different company called Corazon Health. And that's the parties that we're dealing with. Duncan, who is the federal judge, oversees a different prison health case, which was settled more than 3 years ago. So this issue has already been dealt with 3 years ago, and now they're trying to come in compliance. There was a case called Parsons versus Ryan, a prison healthcare case. Ryan is the Arizona Department of Corrections individual who's in charge of this stuff, was sued by Parsons. And so all of this now is saying we had a settlement agreement. The state agreed to meet more than 100 performance measures aimed at providing better health care to inmates in Arizona prison. So 100 performance measures. They settled on it. They had a settlement agreement. The financial sanction of the $1.4 million is a result of the Arizona Departments of Corrections and its contractor, Corazon Health, failing to meet those specific measures that were a part of the settlement agreement. ADC blamed its contractor, so the government says, no, it's the third party Corazon Health for those failures. Duncan, the judge, noted that the state recently rewarded the company with a higher contract and financial incentives. So 3 years ago, Parsons versus Ryan, they know that this Corazon company is failing to provide substantial health care to the inmates. Failing. They re-up the contract. The government just says, that's good enough. We're going to re-up the contract. Here's more money, and we're also going to give you some financial incentives. That's how your bureaucracy works. If a private contractor is pushed to the door, back to the article, because it cannot meet the state's obligations, then so be it, said the judge. Just such a result would flow directly from the state's decision to privatize health to save money. So they wanted to farm this stuff out to Corazon because they would say it saves money. But now they got to pay $1.4 million. So how'd that work out? The goal of privatization cannot be achieved at the expense of the health and the safety of the sick and acutely ill inmates. In addition, the judge ordered an independent monitor to oversee the current state-run monitoring team. Duncan wrote that evidence presented in recent hearings led the court to believe that the ADC monitoring team, which is the government team, and the data they use could not be relied upon. So as part of the settlement, the prison says, yes, we're going to create this little monitoring body. We're going to make sure that we're following the terms of the settlement. You were unhappy 3 years ago. We were not providing health care. We're going to monitor it. We're going to report back to you. This is it. The judge said, well, your monitoring is garbage. You can't rely on it. You're not doing what we said we would do, what you said you would do. Defendants and their contractor are at times more interested in obtaining compliance with the stipulation by playing a shell game than they're more interested in providing care. So they're sort of playing around with this stipulation. They entered into an agreement. They're just make-believing like they're abiding by it. The director of the Americans Friends Service Committee applauded the ruling, says, until Arizona accepts there's no such thing as cheap prison health care, people will continue to unnecessarily die under the care of the ADC and private companies like Corazon. ACLU chimed in here, said that this is a remedy of last resort. The court is out of options. Court had tried other less intrusive mechanisms of gaining compliance from the Department of Corrections. All of them failed. The people inside the Arizona state prisons must receive the necessary health care to which they are entitled under the Constitution. We'll work to make sure that the DOC meets that obligation, saying that Corrections Director and Governor Doug Ducey saying that it sent a message to them. They can't just be nonchalant and indifferent about a federal court order that settled the lawsuit between the parties. People are in custody. They're continuing to die, literally die, while their contractor is providing health care that is patently inadequate and unconstitutional. So I just can't state the severity of this, right? This is not like somebody has a tickle in their throat and they see a doctor a day late. People are dying in prison as a result of this, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. So this is the original judgment. So judgment in a civil case. You can see the amount, $1.4 million down here. It's contempt fines for December 2017, January 2018, and February 2019. only for those months. 1, 2, 3 months. $1.4 million. It's due and payable to the registry of the court to be kept in the registry until further order of the court. Judgment shall bear interest at the federal statutory rate until it's satisfied. So this judge is pissed, not happy. Right? This is not something that happens often. Order and contempt. So this is where the order came from. So let's go through some of this. In October 2014, the parties settled this case. Once again, Parsons versus Ryan. What are we talking about? There was a settlement and a stipulation, which means it's just an agreement. The stipulation is both sides, they come together. We understand each other. We're agreeing that these facts are the same. We agree that this is a reasonable solution. We're both going to go our separate ways and try to get this stuff implemented. All agreed upon, all entered into the record back in 2014. Fairness hearing was set in 2015. Under the stipulation, the defendants, so here the prison, agreed to provide health care to the class members as measured by 103 performance measures. Then in April 2016, defendants failed to meet many performance measures. So the prison failed. The plaintiffs, again, filed a motion to enforce the stipulation. Hey, they're failing. We need you to go and tell them to do it. They went back to the court. The court heard their case. At a status conference, the prison then submitted a response to the remediation plan. So what is the plan that we're going to follow? Court went through. We had a couple different hearings. November 2016, after the first remediation plan to get things back on track, the court determined that the defendant's plan did not, in fact, remedy the deficiencies during the first complaint. They go through some of the law. The court has the power to make them get into compliance. May 2017, we're going through a little timeline here. The defendant Pratt testified he did not know of any instances of compliance with the outside provider order. So they know in May they're not complying. The court then conducted these monthly status conferences with the parties. They were lengthy. They constituted the court's efforts to understand the impediments to compliance, and they wanted to prompt the defendants to meet their obligations under the stipulation. So the court will do this from time to time when they say, we're just going to continue to set status conferences over and over and over again. And what they're doing is it's sort of like a parent just reminding you to clean your room. All right. You're here now. Why can't you provide health care to these inmates? Okay, because it's a prison and I don't know, they're in cells, so it's a little bit different procedure than somebody walking in the front door of their doctor's office. All right, okay, we got that. And I'm not saying that this was their issue. This is just kind of hypothetically speaking, but they say, well, we can't do it, Judge. Here's why. Judge says, all right, fine. Okay, so you can't do this. Mr. DOC, what can you do? Sir, what can you do? And the judge is sort of mediating a solution to this. And then the judge says, can you get that stuff done in 30 days? And they say, yes, Judge, we can do that. Okay. All right, we're going to come back in 30 days and we're going to check. They come back in 30 days. Did you get your stuff done? Apparently, no, we didn't. In May 2017, Pratt says, no, I don't know of any instances where we've been able to comply with that. So the court says, well, okay, we're going to set another status conference. Can you go back and fix that stuff? Because we got to come back and talk about it in 30 days. They're prompting the defendants to meet their obligations. The centerpiece of the status conference, as with the stipulation, was compliance with the stipulation as measured by this. And I want to spend some time on this. The CGAR code. The code green, amber, red results. The CGRs are the monthly report card on the defendant's performance under the stipulation. For many of the PM locations, particularly PM's addresses of critical components of inmates' healthcare compliance remained unattainable. Right, so we're talking about this report card called the CGAR, code green, red, amber, red. Every time they come back to the status conference, are you in compliance? What's your grade? What's your score? June 14th, fast forward. We go from May to June. Court informed the defendants that effective immediately, every single failure to comply with certain performance measures at certain prisons would result in an order to show cause as to why a $1,000 fine should not be imposed. So they're saying, you're on notice now. If you continue to have these problems, every time you have a violation, $1,000. Do you understand? And the court would issue what's called an order to show cause. We're finding you in violation now. You need to come here and show why. What is your cause for your violation? And you need to be prepared to explain why we shouldn't fine you $1,000 for every single instance. We've been monitoring you. We've got a report card. We've got data. We've got remediation plans. We've got a lot of stuff that you can do to go solve this problem. If you don't do it, you better be prepared to explain why I shouldn't ding you $1,000 for every violation. Based on the plaintiff's suggestion that the defendant should have time to cure their ongoing failure to comply, the court held off until October 2017 to enter its order that, quote, effective immediately, defendants shall comply with the specific measures at the specified prisons for everybody. And as a part of that order, the defendants were also required to file a list of every single instance of non-compliance. So now they're keeping count. Better add those up. November comes along, the court adds performance measures. An order to show cause hearing was then set in January 2018. So you can see, and the court does a very nice job here saying, we tried, month after month after month after month. This is a federal court telling the Arizona Department of Corrections, get your stuff together. Month after month, they just say, well, I mean, it's, no, we're not doing it. Defendants requested and they received several extensions for submitting the list of every instance of noncompliance. So the court says, start keeping count. They say, well, we need an extension. As part of these extension requests, the defendants informed the court for the first time that there was no system for collecting real-time data on compliance with any performance measure covered by the stipulation. So they have just been telling them that they know how to measure this stuff. And then finally it comes out. We can't actually even measure it. They submitted a partial OSC list, which is their non-compliance list, but without explanation or warning, they did not timely comply with the court's order. The defendants filed multiple revised lists. The court heard testimony March 26th, March 27th, April 10th. From the following witnesses, goes through. We have the Arizona Department of Corrections Director, Charles Ryan, who's just absolutely asleep at the wheel on this. We got Richard Pratt, who is the Deputy Director. We've got Division Director, Carson McWilliams. We got David Robertson, who's a doctor. We got William Upton. And they've all got responsibilities to ensure compliance with the stipulation. Robertson's also works as a physician monitor in the Arizona Department of Corrections. All right. So as I mentioned, we're talking about the CGAR number, monthly report card on the defendants, the prison's performance under the stipulation. And so let's take a look at what that looks like. The OSC order has not resulted in ADC's compliance with the stipulation. And it says here, every single inmate is required to receive the benefit. It requires 100% compliance with each of the performance measures. The court is saying we want 100% compliance. As the court has repeatedly stated, the stipulation, if it's an 85% threshold, then it's only triggering the court's involvement. The court will get intervening. Well, they'll intervene at 85%. Since the order went out, they've remained below the 85% threshold. And look, it's not even close. Performance measure, At like Florence, for example, 35 out of 100. Lewis, 39. We've got another Florence, another Lewis, another Phoenix, 47, 47, 47. Down in Florence again in December. Went up a little bit, went back up to 50. Basically halfway there for months. And look back at these dates. So they've just identified a couple months. December 2017, January 2018, December, January, 2 months. January, March, 3 months. February, 4 months. 4-month window. About 0.5%, 30% at even. 35%. So what does this mean practically, right? We're talking about a lot of performance and metrics and key performance indicators and compliance and report cards and all this stuff. But practically, what's going on in the prisons? Well, let's take a look. And this is what I was telling you to wait for. The escalation list. What is this section? In the summer of 2017, Dr. Robertson, who we just heard from or talked about, was speaking to Dr. Falhow, who is Corazon's Western Regional Director, almost daily about obtaining specialty care for specific patients because of their consults. Their consults were languishing, and prisoners were not being seen on a timely basis, according to the doctor at this citation. Dr. Robertson felt that, quote, utilization management was being arbitrary. Subsequently, Dr. Falhow, who works with Corazon, and her team decided to have meetings on every one of the cancer patients in the Tucson complex. We skip forward a little bit. This is a long, you can see this is paragraph 14. We're going to skip down to 21. Dr. Robertson testified that the system of weekly meetings about the escalation list is, quote, working to obtain care for individual inmates, but acknowledged that if the system worked as it should, then high acuity patients would receive appropriate care as a matter of course, and there would be no need for an escalation list. There is no version of the escalation list down at paragraph 23 for chronic care patients or patients of slightly lower acuity to ensure that they receive care before they become high acuity patients. So this doctor is in there saying, yeah, this is helping. We have an escalation list. We're basically identifying people who we have not treated. We're going to add them all to a list. These are high priority individuals. They need to be escalated up quickly. This person's got cancer. This person has COVID. They have not been treated. So we're identifying the people who need care urgently. Dr. Robertson is saying if we gave them the actual care that they were due, we wouldn't need an escalation list. And in fact, if we did that, we may not even have high acuity patients anymore. We may be able to treat them before this becomes a problem. So by delaying the care, they're allowing the inmates to get worse. That requires more care, that requires a high acuity designation, that requires them to be put on an escalation list. And so they float around on that list for a while, not getting the care that they need. And so again, you may be saying, well, okay, so they, if I go and see my doctor, if I want to schedule an appointment, they don't get me in the same day. Yeah, all right, I call them the next day. All right, I'll see you tomorrow, or I'll see you Friday, whatever. It's not that. These are people who are just being ignored until their problem becomes so bad that they got to make a special list. Doctor says, well, if we were actually doing what we should be doing, we wouldn't need that list. So what happens now if this is allowed to fester and fester? Well, we have what's called mortality reviews. Let's take a look. Arizona Department of Corrections conducts mortality reviews for each inmate who dies in custody. Starting in February or March 2018, an individual from Corazon's, or Corizon, I don't know how they say it, Continuous Quality Improvement Team started to call Arizona Department of Corrections mortality reviews. They used to call into those. The mortality review team has made recommendations to Corazon's representative, and those recommendations have received a, quote, mixed response. They have not generated a solution for expediting specialty consults. These mortality reviews consistently show a failure to properly document the medical care provided to inmates and a failure in written and verbal communication among the healthcare staff. Of the 18 mortality reviews submitted into question during the OSC hearing, ADC checked yes 6 times to the question, could the patient's death have been prevented or delayed by more timely intervention? Yes, 6 times. So if the ADC had acted sooner, they could have prevented or delayed the death of 6 people. ADC checked yes 8 times to the question, is it likely that the patient's death was caused or affected in a negative manner by healthcare personnel? Yes, 8 times. That's 8 dead people, 6 dead people, 14 dead people, just from a couple months, from a couple of those phone calls that they called in on. Could the patient's death have been prevented or delayed by more timely intervention? Yeah, 6 times. Yeah, we could have saved those 6 people had we had more timely intervention. Is it likely that the patient's death was caused or affected in a negative manner by healthcare personnel? Yes, 8 times. 8 people dead. I'm going to guess that those people didn't go into custody with a life sentence or a death sentence, but that's what they got, because that is what our bureaucratic Arizona Department of Corrections looks like. And the court tried for months to get them to fix it. They wouldn't do it. Couldn't do it. Couldn't figure it out. But Corazon got an extra contract at a higher rate. for repeated failures for months and years. Civil sanctions went out. Judge says the OSC was valid, specific, definite. Defendants had knowledge of the order. They were extended an opportunity to be heard on their noncompliance. They did not take all reasonable steps to comply with the order. As a result, they're going to be fined $1,000 per failed instance for the locations that fall below the threshold of 85%. The information shows these as follows. And you can see them over here. 26 instances, 26, 9, 161 over at Eyman. We have 17, 1 in Phoenix, about 100 or so over at Florence, 897 of those. We go over here, and that was in 1 month, okay? December 2017, 897 violations, 1 month. Next month, January 2018, another 207. So it looks better. So December to January got better. Went from 897 to 207, but then in February, they slid back down. So it went back up to 341 instances of problems. So either they fixed something or they just started counting differently. I think you can guess which one I think it is. 43%, 82%, so that one's getting close. 61, 61, 61, 58, 67, 70, up to 83 here. All below the standard. So they add up the different numbers. We have 897 plus 207 plus 341, add $1,000 to the end of that, and you have defendants shall pay $1.4 million for their 3-month violations within 14 days. Pony that money up. Signed off on by the hero judge, David K. Duncan, United States Magistrate Judge. Further ordered, 30 days. Get it done. Pay your fine. $1.4 million. Where does that money come from? That comes from the public taxpayer. Okay. It's great. Well, actually, they're going to point this back to Corazon. Here in a statement, what does the government say about this? ADC spokesman Andrew Wilder said the AZ Department of Corrections strongly disagrees with his ruling. He's confident the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals will reverse it because it is contrary to both the evidence and the law governing the stipulation between the parties. I really doubt that. It sounds like the court bent over backwards to try to make this thing work. Arizona Department of Corrections Director Charles Ryan told legislators earlier this year that ADC's contractor, Corizon Health, will be responsible for paying the fines. CEO Steve Rector said the judge's ruling failed to recognize the reality of inmate care, which is a very infuriating quote. He says, "We will continue to work closely with ADC to provide the inmate population with the best care in what is often difficult circumstances. We are hopeful the state of Arizona will choose to appeal the court's decision. We look forward to continuing to work constructively in supporting the ADC and Corazon's health steadfast improvement in the delivery of health care." People are literally dying in prison. Our government has orders from federal courts. They just don't do anything about it. They just allow it to just fester. People are dropping dead in there. They signed a new contract with this company. And is anything going to change? Is Corazon just going to pay that $1.4 million and just continue on with their contract? Is it just the cost of doing business? Awful stuff. Let's take a look at some locals.com questions. We got Ma Fox says, sounds like the prosecution complex that pervades Americans and prosecutors alike. It's a cultural issue and it needs to be dealt with before we get any form of justice reform. This is why we need channels like yours. Thanks, you, Ma. Well, you help with that, to promote the foundational principles that we seem to have lost along the way to greatness. And it's why I'm here, and it's why I'm here to stay. Well, we're grateful for you, Ma. And, I think I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. This is the reason why we have this channel. We have some fun, beating up on Joe Biden and some of the police. But what it really comes down to is I think that there is a big demographic in this country of good people, of human beings who deserve a voice. And that's why we cover, the George Floyds and the Breonna Taylors. And we cover these situations. We cover what we talked about yesterday, Angelo Quinto and all of them. Because they're missing a voice in this country. And stories like this, they just go by the wayside. And I know it's not that interesting. I know we're talking about CGARs and we're talking about compliance and the Department of Corrections and healthcare and all of this stuff. And most people are more concerned about the pebble in their shoe that's bothering them than they are about some nameless criminal defendants who probably did something bad that most people disagree with, locked away in a prison, thousands of miles away from their reality. But the fact is, Those are people too, and they are forgotten, and they need representation, and they need a voice out there. And so the fact that we can talk about these things, as I say at the start of the show, with the hope of encouraging some meaningful change, shine that spotlight of accountability and transparency back down upon these people. Most news stories, this story is not going to get covered because it's too dense, it's too thick. And I don't blame it. I know it's not the most interesting segment that we do here, but it is important because people are dying and nobody wants to talk about this stuff. So we'll do it here. Ma, thank you. We love you here. You help us keep the show on the tracks and you're a part of the solution. And we're grateful to have you here. And thank you for the question. We're looking forward to a lot more time with you, my friend. We have Seji also says, send your prisoners here. We can take care of the issues you guys have with people recommitting. Big rocks, little rocks, without some silly decency of criminals. I mean, criminals could be wrongly charged. However, why treat those with decency that have shown themselves not to be able to treat others decently? Then again, while I've never been to jail, I do think we have lesser time for criminals, whereas our prisons are not as nice as in America. So, that would be so fascinating. I would like to make it to Japan one day, maybe when we're allowed to travel again. And I would like to learn more about how other cultures and how other countries do criminal justice reform, because it's been a sort of a fascination of mine to learn more about the different theories, and more than just the theories are pretty easy. They're, rehabilitation, punitive types of punishment, but how are they actually implemented in practice? And I would love to see how the Japanese do it. We have Jeremy Matrita says, I love the perspective you bring to criminals. To uninformed or ignorant, criminals are bad and therefore should be condemned. However, as you said, one wrong move or one bad decision could put you into the group of criminals. They may have made mistakes, but they are certainly still people who deserve to be treated fairly and given the opportunity for redemption. And yes, and they're in the process of doing that, right, Jeremy? They are paying their debt. They are paying their dues. Society has convicted them and they said, you are sentenced to do this. If you do that, then we have this implied contract that we're going to take care of you, right? It's not a death sentence. People take plea deals all the time. Somebody will say, look, I screwed up. I know I've got a problem here. I'm going to agree to take my penalty. I'm going to enter into a plea agreement. I'm going to go to prison for 5 years. I'm agreeing to do that. I'm accepting responsibility. I'm going to pay my penance. And we as a society say, thank you. We're going to give you a better deal. We're not going to go to trial. We're not going to ask for the maximum. We're going to negotiate an agreement and you're going to go serve your time. And in that contract, we as a society have an obligation to make sure that those people don't drop dead because we can't provide them health care, or they don't drop dead because of COVID, or they don't get raped by the prison guards. That's not part of the deal they signed. They didn't sign in there to go in there and get raped in the shower. Okay, that's not part of the deal. The deal is they get removed from society. They pay their penance, and when they come back out, we as a society should say, hey, thank you. You did something wrong. You owned up on it. Welcome back. And we should welcome them back with open arms and with some new tools so that they can learn and make more of their lives while they're in custody, so that when they come back out, they're not a burden on society. They actually can contribute and share their story. But we can't do that if our bureaucrats are just funneling money back and forth between broken third-party entities that are terrible at their job, but continue to get contracts from the bureaucrats here in Arizona and elsewhere around the country. This is not just Arizona. I happen to be plugged into Arizona, so I know more about how this stuff works, but I can guarantee you this is not just a localized incident. I can assure you this is happening elsewhere in this country, especially in light of COVID. Healthcare is already being rationed around this country. People are killing each other over vaccines for some stupid reason and dressing up as grandmas in order to go take the needle out of an actual grandma's arm. And so while the rest of the country is trying to figure out and finagle healthcare, we got to make sure that the prisoners are getting that as well, because it's not part of the deal that they die and they get treated inhumanely. Hack Consulting says, I think people misunderstand speedy trial. I do not want a case to be over in 5 minutes because things get missed. Isn't the meaning to still have a full process completed? Why not delaying unnecessarily? So the right to a speedy trial really protects the defendant. That's what it's for, because it was sort of a commonplace where prior to that right, you would have people charged with crimes and they would just sit in custody forever. The government would keep continuing the case out. So they would have no due process. In other words, that's where you hear the phrase justice delayed is justice denied. And when the court arrests you, or the government arrests you and just holds you in custody indefinitely, because they say, well, we're still investigating. We're still working the case up. Well, we haven't decided to bring charges yet. That's where you see a lot of problems. So the right to a speedy trial actually protects the defendant. The defendant is able to waive some of that. And so in Arizona, we have a rule here called Rule 8. And it's basically saying, there are speedy trial deadlines, 180 days. If it's outside of 180 days, in other words, if the government brings a case against you and they cannot make their case within 180 days, they got to dismiss their case. They got to refile it. If they can't refile it, certain rules that say they can't refile it just to avoid the Rule 8 speedy trial deadlines. And it's kind of a very specific, nuanced area of the law. But it is important. The defendant can waive that. The defendant can say, no, I don't want a trial right now. I'm investigating. I request a continuance. And that Rule 8 is not going to be applied adversely towards the defendant because they can waive that. But the government can't. They can ask for a continuance. They can ask for more time. But the defendant can say, nope, we're going to count the time that you're asking for against you. And if you accumulate too much time, now you're in violation of the speedy trial rules. And the case, there are sanctions for that, including potentially a dismissal of the case. E. Dantes says, when Arpaio first started, I think he was effective. I know someone personally who was deterred from going further down his deviant path by a stay in tent city. Later in his career, I think Arpaio became a victim of his own popularity, which seems to happen to politicians and other famous individuals. Yeah, I said bye. And I think you're exactly right. Sheriff Joe turned into this caricature of a sheriff. He had people out in chain gangs. He had people wearing pink underwear and pink things. I did a video, a clips video. Don't watch it. A long time ago on this channel where I went through some of his greatest hits. I think it's called Sheriff Joe's Greatest Hits. He served people these reprocessed food burrito things. It was like, it looked like they just took everything that was left over in a garbage disposal and just shoved it in a burrito. And that's what he was serving inmates. And he thought it was hysterical. He went out, he had these tent cities built when we didn't need them. He would put a heater like this big in the middle of the tents here in Arizona in December. It gets freezing, it gets to 40 degrees here at night. We're in the desert. It gets hot as hell in July, August, and September, but very cold during the winter times. Very cold for me. I'm an Arizona boy. So some of you are laughing at me going 30 degrees. That's cute, but it's cold for me. So, Sheriff Joe just kind of turned into a joke. Liberty or Death says, I agree with you on this too. Just because people are in prison doesn't mean we need to lose our humanity. People always forget about prisoners when arguing for a myriad of social justice. Healthcare is atrocious in many places. No one ever mentions how many men are sexually assaulted. Some people need to be in prison, but we still need to have standard of care commensurate with those not in prison. Yeah, I agree. I think you're right on Liberty or Death. It's not funny when people joke about it. Kamala Harris, I'm going to constantly beat up on her about it, mocking prisoners. Please, sir, can I have some more water and stuff like that? It's a cultural problem. These are people that need help and they can be saved. We should not treat them like garbage and disposable. Good to see you, Liberty. Want to Know says, who gets the money? Well, the court is hanging on to the money right now as a sanction, and they'll probably figure out what to do with that. They didn't give us an answer on that, but they got to deposit the money with the courts, and we'll see what the court wants to do with it after that. Sharon Quidney says, good for that judge. I'm with you 100%. There are people in custody. These are people in custody, so they need to be taken care of properly. Seems to me like depriving prisoners of health care would constitute cruel and unusual punishment, wouldn't it? Isn't that in the Bill of Rights? Well, you are, and I think that you are right, Sharon, and I think that's where this original lawsuit happened. So we didn't cover the ultimate settlement agreement because we would have gone back to 2017, I think actually 2014. And so we didn't cover any of that, but yeah, I think the underlying original claim was a class action by a bunch of prisoners who were upset that they weren't getting the proper health care. So this has been going on for almost a decade now. And now we're just seeing a result. Okay, penalize them, $1.4 million. Pinky 2 says, as a juvenile diabetic, I understand serious healthcare needs. I cannot imagine if a diabetic like myself with constant intervention needed all day, because if you had it a lifetime, things are more challenging. That's one illness. So many chronic illnesses require meds all throughout the day. These are people like us that were convicted of a crime. They don't always come in healthy. Being behind bars, we stripped everything from them. Yeah. And I think that we as a society, as a compassionate society, have to make sure that we're caring for these people. And I'm not saying that they need to be like at a Four Seasons. Okay, we don't need to put them up at the Ritz-Carlton. but we do have to give them the basic standard of care. That's the decent humane thing to do, and it's not happening right now. Ma Fox says, I see the American cultural problem with justice daily. The moment the state charges someone, they're instantly guilty, and everyone gasps in shock and horror at what the state claims they have done without any evidence or partially constructed evidence. People just believe what these prosecutors claim without any semblance of anything resembling forethought. It's frightening how dependent we are on the government for information. And cheers to that, Ma. Very well put, very articulate. Very nice paragraph there. I couldn't agree with you more. I think that a lot of people have just been indoctrinated. Cops good, criminals bad. Cops good, criminals bad. All day, every day. And a lot of the humanity has been ripped out of the process. You see that on both sides. You see cops who are acting inhumanely. You see prisoners who are acting inhumanely. Prison guards, prison systems, Arizona Department of Corrections. It's just all across the board. And then even people who are not in law enforcement, on the other side, they're sort of watching what the cops are doing and they're cheering them on. Yeah, good job. Go get them. Go round up those criminals. Every time justice reform comes up, I popped into a different room over on Clubhouse, and it was a conservative room. And I said, hey guys, I think you're missing the mark on some of this criminal justice reform stuff. There are a lot of Americans in this country who, like me, are more, libertarian-ish minded, smaller government minded, and justice reform is the epitome. The law enforcement system is sort of the epitome of the big problems that we see in government. So maybe as the GOP or as Republicans or as libertarians or as more of a freedom-oriented group, that becomes an issue, and they sort of just laughed me out of the room, because they're so brainwashed into cops are good, criminals are bad. We got to support the police no matter what, even though the police are largely funded by unions and they have billion-dollar budgets, no accountability, no transparency whatsoever. They won't even put on body cameras in certain cases. So, Ma, I think you're right. I think that you're part of the solution. What we're trying to do on this show is open eyes a little bit to the prospect that maybe we can hold our government, our elected officials, our law enforcement agencies to a higher standard to better serve all of us in society. And I think the criminal justice system is truly the tip of the spear because it's the forgotten agents. It's a forgotten entity. People just write off anybody who goes through it because of what they have been indoctrinated to believe. Seji says, personally, I do not think that prisoners deserve to be treated as well as Americans do. Instead of worrying about their care, worry about their guilt. If they have a serious health condition, had a serious crime, then I would promote the idea that consideration of death penalty be expedited so that they can go quickly and safely. Then again, this is also with the prejudice that your sentences are far too long, make prisons rougher, and make the time shorter. So I'm not real sure if Seji's playing devil's advocate here. Innocent people go to jail too, in Japan too. However, by paying more attention to the guilt and the health, as well as with shorter terms and harsher conditions, we seem to have found a way to respect the possibility of innocence while largely having an effective prison system. Of course, once guilt aspect is taken care of, then you should focus on health. So, Seji, I think that maybe we just shouldn't even have prisons. Maybe as soon as somebody is convicted, even if it's a traffic ticket, we just say, all right, well, you had your shot. That's it. Right to the electric chair. Just right out of the way. Sorry. We are a society of laws. And if you break the law, death penalty. Bye. Then we don't even have to talk about healthcare. We don't even have to have prisons. Think about all that money that goes to the prisons. We should just have a big cliff and we just throw people right off of it every time they break the law. Osak says, Rob, great job on the show. Don't let things get you down. We support you. Question. So when a judge, thank you, Osak, for that. I appreciate it. Genuinely, I do. I'm not down. I just get a little bit frustrated from time to time. Question. So when a judge makes a ruling in a case, how long is it from the date it signed till the date it is made known to the public? Is the average time 1, 2, or 3 days or more? And is there a difference if it's highly publicized time? Is there a difference in time versus state versus federal? Very good question, Osak. It kind of depends on a lot of different factors. So if it is a federal court case and you're an attorney, you can get that stuff pretty quickly. So like with Ghislaine Maxwell, for example, I logged into a different platform called Pacer, and you pay some money. I think I paid $1.90 for the documents that we went through today. Very small amount, like 10 cents a page or something like that. And I just download the documents. So those are almost instantly available but you have to be an attorney to go and access those documents. Another way that the public can get it is if you go to, there's a website called courtlistener.org, which different attorneys will install a browser plugin so that when they're browsing Pacer and they're downloading documents, it's awesome. It will actually download a document to the court listener so that it now becomes publicly available. It's all public record, so you're not violating any public privacy rights or case confidentiality rules or anything like that. But it's just behind a paywall because that's what the government does. So, some of those things are immediately available. In other cases, some courts, like more local courts, like there's one case that I tried to find information on, but I just couldn't do it. There's certain states that just have very inaccessible court records. So Arizona is actually one of them. We have public access, but you still can't go in there and download certain documents. A lot of our stuff is available online, but you can't get the actual document. So if you wanted to do that, then they're just not by default made publicly available. You would have to go file a FOIA request or a specific record request from that court. So it just depends. Thousands of different courts, thousands of different jurisdictions. Some of it you can get right away. Some of it you have to submit a formal request, and that can take, 6 weeks on some stuff. So we have another one from Nadarb. Do you know what the average score is across the country, and is AZ just doing horrible or just our prisons in general? So good question, Nadar. I don't know, honestly, what the landscape of prisons are across the country. I would guess that it's probably very similar to what we have here in Arizona. A lot of these companies, these are actually very big companies, and they offer services to different facilities across the country. So I'm not sure what other contracts, Corazon or Corizon or whatever, that they have, but I'm going to guess it's not just one prison, right? This is a company that is healthcare for prisons, and I'm going to guess that they have, the same contracts with other agencies throughout the country, and so you could probably expect the same standard of care based on that one company, and they're just one of a dozen that are also offering services to our law enforcement facilities. Sharon Quidney says, this is horrible. It's effectively a death sentence. The amount the judge is ordering as a fine is way too little. And I agree with you on that. That was sort of the first instinct that I had. Well, this is pretty low. But then when you think about it, it's only 3 months. It's only 3 months that are a part of that sentence or part of that sanction. So if the judge says, all right, well, we're also going to get you for the rest of the year here, and we're going to go backwards a different way, and we're going to start adding it all up, that number could go up quickly. We have Hack Consulting says, the issue is likely the corrections officers too busy acting like little tyrants in their position of authority and likely go back to checking their phone instead of the cameras. Wish people would have a work ethic. Yeah, and I think you're right on the mark there, Hack. It's sort of indifference, it's apathy, it's laziness, it is culture. It's just, they're just prisoners. Oh, that guy's a child molester. Oh, that guy beat his wife. Oh, that guy's an alcoholic. Oh, that guy's a drug addict. Who cares? That guy's a maniac. He's a mental illness guy, right? His hygiene's bad. He stinks. We don't want to go deal with that guy. So, Rob, the prison should be placed back under state control or leave it private business. Yeah, I'm not real sure what the solution is on it, other than we get a lot more accountability, a lot more transparency. This case has obviously been going on for a long period of time. They got a lot of leeway, and people were dying as a result. Bumma lick it. Why not parole them early? At least they did time for the crime already. Politicians did more harm to society and no penalty to impose to them. Where is the justice? It's a good question. It doesn't feel like justice because a group of people are paying a much bigger penalty than what they had already agreed to and what society had deemed fair. What a court of law deemed fair, what prosecutors deemed fair, what their defense attorneys deemed fair. They get a sentence that is their life when they didn't sign that. Nadarb says, how do you feel about the media and how they are allowed to talk about cases people before they have been tried and pretty much make someone guilty before they have ever seen the judge? Should they be able to report on it the way they do? Just curious how you feel about that. Yeah, Nadarb, I do think that they should be able to report about it. I think that it is public interest. I would definitely not like to see sort of a moratorium on any of this stuff. I think it is important that we talk about these issues. And it certainly is not without its problem. Okay, we were just talking about today on Clubhouse the Derek Chauvin trial. Is that guy going to get a fair trial? Right? It's reprehensible to even talk about him with the defense hat on to say, he's still got the presumption of innocence. Like, ew, that feels kind of icky. right? He's an innocent man at this moment in time. He's not been convicted. We all saw what he did, and I think he's probably going to get convicted, but we'll see. The George Floyd case has some interesting stuff in that autopsy report. A lot of drugs in that system, right? So what is the defense going to do here? Now, the question, Nadarb, is he going to get a fair shake? Everybody in this country, I would imagine, I don't know, half the country, let's say, to be reasonable, saw the video and saw what happened there. So how is Derek Chauvin going to get a jury of people who are unbiased, who are fair and impartial, who haven't seen any of this coverage? I mean, that's really the ideal, is you get a bunch of people who never heard of George Floyd, don't know anything that happened. They hear it all for the first time. Can you find a juror like that? I don't know. I think it's going to be a tough thing to try to find, and we'll see what the defense team can do in order to find a truly fair and impartial jury. But that's where this adversarial system comes into play. So the media can talk about it all day long, and I think that's better. I would rather the media talk about it, because if we don't talk about it, then we're not going to see where the problems are. We can't shine that spotlight on stuff that nobody's talking about. So we're doing that on a regular basis here to be a part of the solution. And I think that's how you root out a lot of the malfeasance and a lot of the misconduct. It's by shining that light on it so that you can open it up and explore what's going on and identify the problems. So it's up to the attorneys and the adversarial system. The prosecutor is going to want to get a bunch of jurors on his case that are going to convict. The defense has to find a bunch of people that are not going to convict. And by setting up a system where we're supposed to have equal sides asking equal questions of the jurors, then they can synthesize by the form of a dialectic, by having a conversation during the voir dire process when they're asking jurors questions. Are we going to end up with a fair and impartial jury? I don't know. It's up to them to figure that out. And I think that is just part of the system. We certainly want to continue to talk about these issues because that's the only way that we can root out the problems in our system. We have Farmer's Daughter says, Robert, you are a lovely, compassionate man. Oh, Farmer's Daughter, I'm going to blush over here. Somebody bring me an ice pack. Thank you for your humor and your intelligent insights. We need more folks like you. Well, thank you, Farmer's Daughter. It's a very nice, very, very nice statement. I appreciate you much. Thank you for sharing that. We have Croc1 Alpha says, I have a fundamental disagreement with the prison system that upskills prisoners who did wrong when those who struggle street that don't get the same upskilling opportunities, but did obey the rules and society expectations. Okay. So that's a fair point, actually, Croc1 Alpha. I really appreciate that. So I think what you're saying is, as a society, we have a lot of people in the world already who don't get the benefits of being provided education or tools that they can increase their skills so that they can become more marketable, live more productive lives, make more money, have better relationships, whatever your sort of success criteria happen to be. And so you're saying if we suddenly gave those opportunities to inmates while we're neglecting the people out in the real world by providing those opportunities, that doesn't seem right? The people in prison have done something wrong, whereas the people outside have not done something wrong. And so you're affording people in the prisons better benefits than the people outside of the prisons. I think that's a fair critique. And I think you can have some very good in-depth conversations about it. In my opinion, I think the goal here is that the people in the prisons are below the standard. We have a set of rules in society that we say you gotta abide by this standard. We're trying to get everybody up to that, right? We're trying to get people with full education and school and healthcare. We're working towards that. I think everybody wants that. Even libertarians and conservatives, the so-called heartless fiscal conservatives who are always complaining about spending and taxes, right? Which is largely me. I'm always complaining about taxes. But my underlying goal is not to strip people of healthcare and education and success and happiness. That's not at all. I just think there's a better way to get that to people in the most effective way. And the government is not part of that solution. The government slows that down. It hampers everybody. It taxes people so that they can't go and be creative with their money and hire new people and start new industries and create new products and sell new widgets. The government depresses American innovation when they do all of that stuff. And so what we're talking about here is the level. I want everybody to get up to that level. When you break the law, it's pretty clear that you're falling below that standard. You're no longer in comportment with the baseline that we expect out of society. And so you got to go down into prison. You're down here below the line. And so when I talk about giving them opportunities in education, in my opinion, it's to rehabilitate them back up to that position. And I know that that might seem unfair because you're saying, well, there are other people who are below the line and they haven't broken the law. So how do we get them up there as well? And I'm open to those conversations about it. And I'm open to those things. And I think it's a good point. And I think we have just disagreements about how the people who are outside, who are under that line, who are not in prison, how do we get them up most effectively? It's a different system because they have freedom where the prisoners do not. So we have a little bit more obligation because we've already taken something away from them. And so we have a little bit of a different environment versus somebody who's out of custody. But it's a very good point. It's a great question. Thank you for asking. Seji says, while our prisons are a bit rougher than America, at least we provide them food and water. Sheesh. I know. Hack Consulting says, at Robert, I think the reason why people freak out about the initial charges and never readjust is due to a lack of critical thinking, like the New York Times SIFT method. I don't know what that is. As such, when the state presents charges that will later be argued, no one sticks around a year to see what the judge has to say. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's accurate, right? People, it's sort of like drive-by outrage. That's ridiculous. That person's a piece of garbage. Did you read anything about the case? Did you see the defense? Did you see any evidence presented? No, but I read a headline and I saw it on Facebook. Shouldn't be drinking and driving. Throw that person away for 100 years. All right. I get it. Nadarb says, I was arrested once for felony drug charges. I was locked up in a room with 50 other people, including people charged with murder, violent crimes, all because my charge was a felony charge. That is just insanity. In no reality should a drug offender of any kind be locked up in the same area as violent criminals. I totally agree with you. Totally agree. I think that the culture on drug crimes is horrendous. I think that it just perpetuates drug use, addiction, and death. And we can change that immediately. A lot of this is remnants from all of the 1980s and 1990 crime bills. All just really severely penalized drug use. Seji says, why is there such a disparity between felony and misdemeanor? And yes, just execute everyone when they are convicted. No need to worry about innocent convictees. Hey, sometimes if you want to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs. All right. Why is it such a difference? I don't know. That's just how our system works. It kind of came out of a common law tradition where our statutes developed into what they are now. And I think it's time for a refresh on a lot of it. I think that a lot of what we have on the books today in terms of criminal charges are from a bygone era, and they're in dramatic need of being refreshed. But the reason we don't see it is because if a politician comes out there and says, well, we're going to reform a lot of this stuff, then they're deemed as being soft on crime. They lose the support of the police unions. They lose the support of the firefighters. All the conservatives bail out. They say, what? I thought the police were anointed saints and heroes. And so they don't support that individual. And I think that's a real big problem because a lot of people, a lot of good people, even though they've been convicted of a crime, they're good people. They've got good hearts. They've got families. They got kids. They're going to be okay when they come back out of it. We don't need to wreck their lives because you don't like the idea of a criminal being out in the streets when you don't know anything about what that means today. All right. Dr. MD says that Capitol Hill rioters are being held without bail. How long can they be held without a trial? So that is the speedy trial right. So it sort of depends on what they do with it, right? If they demand a speedy trial, it depends. I'm not sure what the rules are on all their individual cases, but in Arizona, our speedy trial rules are 180 days, and it's largely that across the country. I just can't speak and pinpoint the exact time specifically because we're talking about a whole category of offenses here. But it's about 6 months. I mean, if you are in trial, if you're being held in custody, if you're that, for example, that New York Police Department retired officer who got picked up, turned himself in on Monday, he's now being held without bail. If he said, I want a trial like immediately, it probably, according to the rules, would have to happen within 6 months. So still a long period of time. And he would get credit for that time if he is convicted. So typically what ends up happening is, they'll make their arguments. The judge will modify the bond. He'll be able to get out of custody. Once he's out of custody, there's no real impetus to have a speedy trial. So they'll probably try to negotiate this out. They'll have a back and forth with the prosecutors. They'll exchange discovery. They'll have plea negotiations. We just saw that 2 attorneys who were charged for throwing those Molotov cocktails back during the summer unrest, They've been proposed a plea deal. And so really the urgency is because people want to get out of custody. Once they're out of custody, the urgency, just as a practical matter, sort of evaporates, and they're more interested in having negotiations about resolving the case without a trial. Jeremy Matrita says, yeah, Corazon Health revenue is $1.5 billion. They deserve to be fined as much as they have. They have plenty of resources to improve the care. They must be lacking in competence. Yeah, competence or concern. Maybe they just don't even care. I mean, so think about that. $1.5 billion was the revenue in 2015. Thank you for looking that up, Jeremy. Very interesting fact. And this just kind of proves the point. If they're fined $1.4 million and their total revenue is $1.5 billion, that $1.4 million is just a cost of doing business. It's like tip money. It's like, okay, it's a cost of doing business. All right, well, it's $1.4 billion. What was our contract there with the state of Arizona? How long does that go? Oh, great. It's a, $50 million, $100 million contract, whatever that is over the next 5 years. I don't know what it is, just speculating. And so that $1.4 million, it's tip money. They don't even care. It's just a rounding error. It's the cost of doing business, and they just move on. OSOC says, Rob, AZ runaround, due process is BS. Not filing charges just to get more time is shady at best. I think if you arrest, you should have enough time to move forward. Yeah, so I think what OSOC is talking about is that really long statute of limitations that we have where you can commit a crime and they can file charges against you 5 years later, 6 years later, 7 years later in Arizona, because that's how much time they have under our rules. We have Hack Consulting says, we already have a proper distinction between felony and misdemeanors already. Felonies are worse than misdemeanors. Now let's rewrite the charges such that a conviction matches the categorical penalties of felony misdemeanor. So yeah, so I think you're just sort of saying we need to do a reorganization of them. Maybe there are a lot of felony charges currently right now that maybe shouldn't be felonies. Okay, maybe those are drug charges, like for example, Arizona, possession of narcotic drugs. It's a class 4 felony. If you have prior convictions, you go to prison for 2.5 years for that. For drugs. Prison, years, 2.5 years. For an addict. 3 strikes rules, thank you, 1994 crime bill. And maybe that shouldn't be a felony anymore that has the same penalty. Maybe we take that possession of narcotic drugs, drop it down from that felony category into a misdemeanor category where we have more options. We can do diversion agreements, we can do treatment, substance abuse agreements, and all sorts of other stuff. And that's what I'm talking about, Hack. I think it's a good point, and thanks for bringing it up. All right, that was the last question. Long show today. Oh, my goodness. We had 3 segments, and it was the longest show we've done in a long time. I want to thank everybody who supports us over on Locals. Great people over there. Chairman of the board, we got CLRO. We've got Dr. Renal MD, New York Renal MD in the house. Saw him today. Who else do we have going on? We got Sliding Edge, Ma Fox, as always, Miss Faith Joy. As always, Farmer's Daughter in the house with a very nice compliment. Thank you for that. We got Jen McClellan chimed in. Big ups to Liberty or Death. Great questions today all around. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. Cats59, XN Drew, Rolf77. We got Realtor Patty, One Drop. We've got Officer Warrior, Jamie Boy, Paula MK. Others, we got 111 Patriot, Lollipop Doc, Arcturians. And then we got a couple new people who signed up last night. Thank you and welcome to Sim Walla. We got Ross Cares 22 or Ross Scares. Nope, Ross Cares 22. A couple other people joined up the day before that. Ruler Law, Katie Sherlock, TOS Forever, New Ms. J. We got Carl, Aunt Deb, Stookie, Anki Woe, who are all, and Nancy Spells Fun. They're all over there on locals.com. I want to thank you, everybody, for heading on over there and supporting the show. It's fun trying to build a little bit of a community. I know I talk about this at the end of the show every time, but it is important. I think it's important to sort of diversify our community, build other pillars where we can have more free speech, because I think this is the future. I think that the bubble on YouTube is going to shrink and shrink and shrink. I'm hearing from other friends of mine who have channels and say, yeah, views are down for the controversial stuff. They want it to be tech videos, makeup videos, and, celebrity gossip, and then CNN. All right. So if that's what they want to do, then we as free thinkers, rational thinkers, we got to find other places where we can have the real conversations. Because if you have to limit your speech, are you really having a free conversation? Are you really sharing your thoughts? If you have to be careful about your pronouns and your verbs and the language that you use for fear of getting canceled or triggering somebody, it's a bummer that we can't have the same conversations that we used to have, but It's all right. We have other platforms. And so those of you on Locals are helping us build and achieve that vision. So thank you very much for that. If you're not already over there, you can get a couple cool things. Grab a copy of my free book by heading over there. It's called Beginning to Winning. It's available on Amazon, but you can download the PDF. The link is on Locals. Miss Faith posts the slides over there. The impeachment party documents are there, but those are going to be getting a refresh. The existence systems, check those out. I'm working on a little bit of a project for that. Good links and conversation, as well as all of the great people. We had a lot of great questions today, really, really good questions today. So thank you for those. And those came from locals.com. And so if you want to participate on the next show, head on over there. It's $5 a month if you want to subscribe and ask a question. Otherwise, you can just join for free. You don't even have to pay anything. You can download the stuff. I don't put much, if anything, behind the supporter only paywall or anything like that. So head on over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com if you want to join. And then lastly, the last little note of the day is I am a criminal defense attorney. That's my day job. That's what we are building here at our firm. We got an awesome team of people. We love to help good people charged with crimes. That's why I get so passionate about this stuff, is because that's what we do on a daily basis. And so if you know anybody who's been charged with a crime, things like DUI, domestic violence, drugs, minor felonies, major felonies, if they want to clear up a record, if they want to remove a mugshot from the internet, restore their rights so they can vote again, have a firearm again, apply for federal benefits, we help with all that stuff. We're very good at it. We like to help good people find safety, clarity, and hope in their cases and in their futures. And so if you know anybody who needs any of that help, send them our way. We'd be humbled and honored at your referral. We'll take very good care of them. Make sure they leave better than they found us. And that's it for me. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Long show. Thanks for sticking with me through it. We'll see you back here, same time, same place tomorrow. It's 5 p.m. Arizona time, 4 p.m. in California in Pacific time, 6 p.m. Central in Texas, 7 p.m. on the East Coast. And for that, Florida man, everybody have a very wonderful night. Sleep well. See you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.